I believe in the paranormal, but I will go out of my way to weigh out every logical explanation that I can possibly think of before assuming that something is paranormal. I've told myself that this is sleep paralysis to make myself feel better, but it was such an odd encounter. I was 14 at the time that this occurred. I'm now in my late 20s. And I was really into gothic stuff, witchcraft, spooky shit, etc. I had a friend who had a Ouija board and wanted to come spend the night and play with it. Of course, I jumped on the idea, so she came right over. As I predicted, absolutely nothing happened. Though at one point the piece did slide off of the board, but we ended up blaming each other. I'm still pretty sure it was her. After a while, as I said, we got bored, and we gave up and went to sleep. About a week later, I came home from school and felt tired, which was abnormal for me because I'd normally throw my backpack down and immediately go outside. But I decided that I would take a nap. No one was home except me. I went to bed and passed out immediately. I woke up and couldn't move, and panicked. I've never had sleep paralysis before, nor had I even heard of it. So needless to say, this was horrifying. I then levitated off of my bed and toward the middle of my room, where I began to rotate in a slow circle. I felt like I was screaming internally, yet no sound was coming out of me, and then I finally woke up. I bolted out of my room and stayed up for the rest of that day. My mom insisted that it was sleep paralysis, and reassured me that it happens to people sometimes, so I thought nothing of it, and moved on. About a month later, it happens again, at night this time. I floated toward the center of the room like before, and promptly from there was slammed against my upper walls and ceiling by some sort of force that I couldn't see. I could feel its hands on me though, and I could physically feel myself hitting the wall. I felt tingly as well, as if my soul might fly out of me. I don't know exactly how to describe this feeling. It was almost like I was vibrating, like when your foot falls asleep, but the needle jab numbness feeling doesn't feel quite painful. It was strange. I thought it was just sleep paralysis and reminded myself that I was dreaming to try and calm down, and started sort of willing myself to wake up, if that makes sense. I woke up, put on some music, and went back to sleep, and slept fine. The next morning I got up for school and was absolutely covered in bruises. It literally looked as though someone had beaten me with a baseball bat. So I told my mom, who said that I had probably just thrashed around in my sleep. This wouldn't be possible though, because I slept on a very soft, queen-size mattress, and I'm a small person. I even went around my bed to see if there's anything that I could have bumped into. There was nothing. She said maybe I had hit myself in my sleep, but there were bruises on my back and shoulders too, so it just didn't make sense. I tried to just brush it off, but by this point I was getting really paranoid. For the next few weeks I would have instances where I would start to fall asleep. My body would tingle like it did in the last experience, and I knew that if I let myself fall asleep that I would have the weird sleep paralysis again. So I would force myself awake, and adjust my sleeping position, and then try to fall asleep once more. I would do this repeatedly until I could finally drift off without this tingly sensation. This became a daily thing, but I was okay with that because I figured out how to basically avoid sleep paralysis, and thought that the creepy dreams were over with. A couple of months go by with no incidents, and I had pretty much forgotten about it. By this point it never really crossed my mind anymore, but I would still have the tingly feeling from time to time. It was Saturday. My mom was out with friends, my siblings were visiting family, and I was home alone. I kept feeling very strongly like I was being watched, but I told myself that I was just being paranoid, and that it was nothing. This is where it gets weird. I'm sitting on my bed, wide awake, writing in my journal. It's about 9 p.m. or so. The radio is on full blast, and all of a sudden I'm snatched off of my bed, while wide awake, by this invisible thing. I start screaming, and it starts slamming me into walls again. Finally, after a few minutes, it stops, and I float back to the center of the room, where I slowly start spinning in circles mid-air, much like the first experience. Only this time I can see myself lying on my bed on my back, with my legs crossed as they were when I was sitting there, hyperventilating with my eyes open while some sort of figure sits next to me. It looked like it would be extremely tall if it stood up. It was skinny with a masculine-looking build. Think tall and very skinny but muscular man. It had shoulder-length wavy hair, though it was really more of just like a shadowy outline of hair. Its body was made up of swirling black smoke only, and I don't know how to explain this any better. This smoke was darker than just being black. Like, imagine if the color black could be darker than it already is. That's what that color was. I have literally never seen a color this dark anywhere else. It was like seeing a color that no one has ever seen. The thing had big yellow almond-shaped eyes and a tiny black pupil in the middle of each one, but I couldn't discern any facial features. It didn't move. It just sat there staring at me for what felt like hours. Finally, I jump awake, and I'm laying in a pool of sweat. I immediately start crying and flipping out because, like I said before, I did not fall asleep. I was wide awake and sitting up when this happened. I wasn't even thinking about sleep. I wasn't even tired. My pen was still in my hand, my radio was still up loud, and my legs were still crossed. Maybe I fainted, but that's never happened to me before. Thankfully, we moved shortly after that, and it never happened again, but to this day, the hair on my arms stands up when I remember this thing. I've read a lot about sleep paralysis demons and experiences, and nothing seems to quite match what happened to me. I have a few stories that I can't explain, but this is the one that I feel I need to share because it happens to align with a type of experience that so many people have reported throughout the years, arguably since ancient times. I'd always been certain of what I saw, but when I first became aware of shadow people as a commonly reported phenomena, any doubt that I had about the incident disappeared. So many people have tried to tell me that what I experienced was just a dream or simply brushed it off with that look that says this guy is either nuts or lying. And honestly, it's time that people start taking victims of paranormal visitation at their word. In an age where we're starting to wake up to the fact that victims of all forms of abuse deserve a voice and representation, it's sad to see that so many people are disregarded as mentally ill or confused just because their experience lacks an accredited scientific explanation. My experience was not as extreme as some that I've heard from others on various paranormal forums and podcasts, but it has affected my life in a number of ways, and to have the source of so many anxieties and frustration in your life disregarded as a dream or a fiction leaves a person feeling very alone, unable to really explore their trauma, because the subject is so taboo and very few people are willing to take your account seriously and help you search for answers. This is my story. And I assure you, I have nothing to gain by bringing you a false account. I just want to put my testimony out there so that other experiencers can know that they are not alone and that they are, probably at least, not crazy. There are things in this life that do not yet have a scientific explanation, and humanity is not the only sentient intelligence that operates in this world. Beyond that, I really don't know a damn thing. But accepting the fact is the first step in beginning to fully understand the nature of this world, or any others that may exist. The first time I saw it, I was about 8, maybe as old as 10. I was living in a dingy little house in Clear Lake, Iowa, in what you would consider to be the trashier part of a small tourist town. My room was at the end of a long hallway, on the right side of the hall if you were looking toward it from the kitchen on the opposite end. Across the hall, the left side, was my toddler sister's room, and in the middle of the hall on the left was the door to my parents' room. One morning I got out of bed and started to move toward the kitchen. When I was just about at my parents' door, looking toward the kitchen, the figure appeared. It sort of leaned into the hall from the living room, which was adjacent to the kitchen. It was a tall, black figure. Black as in pitch black, but sort of smoky and hazy, like it was just a bunch of compressed black smoke molded into a human form. Everyone seemed tall to me as a kid, but this thing certainly seemed taller than my parents, who were about 5'5" and 5'6" respectively. The only distinguishable feature on the being were that it had two glowing red eyes, just like circular LEDs, on its face. They didn't really seem to be the size and shape that a human eye really is, but truly round and glowing very brightly. This detail I'm sort of fuzzy on, but that's what I recall. From the moment it leaned into view, the thing was just watching me, and when I saw it, I stopped and watched it back. I wasn't exactly scared, but had the distinct impression that this was all it was there to do, to watch. I knew that this wasn't something that I should be seeing in the real world, and I was uncomfortable, but all in all, the thing was non-threatening and didn't make any advancements on me. It just stood there for a minute or two, and then leaned back out into the living room. I didn't follow it to see if it had disappeared. I just went back to my room until my parents woke up. I never, quote-unquote, woke up from this experience. My day progressed seamlessly into a normal day. I knew that this was not a dream because I was very familiar with my dreams. I had constant night terrors in this house, but I'll get into that later on. The point being, the kinds of dreams that I had were more distinctly bizarre and surreal than this experience, and I always woke up with an understanding that what I had experienced that night was just a dream. This was not the case that morning. If I was dreaming that morning, then I'm still dreaming, because like I said, I never woke up from it. The second experience was just as brief, but a bit more menacing. I can't say how much time passed between the two events, but this incident was dead in the middle of the day, full daylight with other people in the house going about their daily business. My mother was in the living room, and I had just walked into the kitchen and toward the hall. I was now standing approximately where the figure had been on the first occasion, looking down toward my room and my sister's. Suddenly, the figure appeared. This is where it gets really bizarre, because the thing actually crept out of my room. I mean, this effing thing was literally creeping, like some old-school Scooby-Doo villain walking on tiptoes with its arms raised and hands bent toward the floor. If you get what I'm illustrating here, you should probably laugh, because it was just as goofy as it sounds. It crept from my room into my sister's room, which is what really freaked me out by this event. The whole thing was over in just a few seconds. Moving in this bizarre manner, it had its head turned toward me the entire time. From the moment that it crossed the threshold of my door, its eyes were already on me, as if to say, yeah, I'm here, straight creeping around your house, and there's nothing you can do about it. No one's gonna believe you. I had already told my mom about the first sighting, and of course she had dismissed it as a dream or my overactive imagination. So I didn't bring it up, but I was really scared that it had some sinister intentions with my sister. I do remember her having some nightmares around this time, which I heard from my room, her crying to my mom about how the quote-unquote creature from the Black Lagoon was standing in the corner of her room. I asked her about this years later, but she doesn't remember any details on that. So that's it. That's all I saw of this shadow person. But there's another element to my life at this house that I feel might be relevant to what I experienced. As I mentioned earlier, I was prone to night terrors while living in this house. Vivid but bizarre nightmares that almost always had something to do with being chased by various demons, monsters, etc. One recurring type of dream I had went like this. I'd be laying in my bed, everything seeming to be completely normal in my room, as it was in waking life, but I would get this feeling, It was this instinctual understanding that something horrible was about to come through my door. I would start to panic, but would be unable to move my body, so rather than use my arms and legs to physically leave my bed, I would, through a sheer force of will, hover off of my bed and float to the corner of the ceiling, as out of reach as possible. Nothing else was really different about my room and these experiences except for that dread. The dread that something was trying to get in. Another night I had a similar dream, where I woke up in my familiar room to find a tall, hairy man standing above me, reaching for me. I had the strong sense that this skinny, ape-like man was there to take me, and I recall doing my best to resist him, but the ending to that dream is fuzzy. That scares me to this day, more than the shadow person encounters, because the hairy men are a pretty common occurrence in high strangeness research, so I can't help but worry that there was some reality to that experience. I bring these dreams up because it seems that vivid nightmares in certain locations, this happened only in that house, that also have reported paranormal activity, indicates a relationship between the two. If you subscribe to the idea that these beings feed off of fear, then it seems plausible that the two are connected. This happened about 3 years ago, but has really affected how I think about ghosts and the paranormal ever since. When I tell my friends, some of them find it very creepy, while others say they don't believe in any supernatural things, and while it is odd, they feel there must be some other explanation. I took a family vacation, me, my parents, and 2 siblings, over Christmas. All of us were already adults at this time, and while my family is agnostic and holds out judgment for the afterlife, none of us are religious or believe that there is a true afterlife with heaven or hell. That said, my parents thought it would be fun for us to stay at a haunted hotel in Jerome, Arizona on our way to a resort town further down the road. This whole town is supposedly haunted, but especially the hotel, which used to be a mental hospital that has long since been converted. We checked in, and were given 2 of the most supposedly haunted suites because we needed 2 large adjoining rooms for everyone to fit. So far, everything was normal, until we got to the room. My mom and sisters suddenly smelled something they described as putrid in a spot in one of our rooms. I couldn't smell it, so dismissed it and moved on. We took a walk around the town, and I asked a bakery owner about the haunted stories, and she said it's just accepted that sometimes things fly off her shelves at home, but nothing hostile. Here is where the weird stuff starts. We signed up for the nighttime tour of the hotel, and a largish group of people, and we were all given electromagnetic readers while we walked around, and heard the stories of the mental patients that died there. Halfway through the tour, my dad and sister hear a sound and turn around to see the doorknob of the room next to them shaking and rattling incessantly. I didn't personally see it, so by this time I was getting bored. I always thought it would be cool if ghosts existed, but didn't really believe they can do anything to affect the physical world. I asked my sister to take some Instagram pictures of me in a cool-looking couch in one of the haunted suites, and she took some quick shots. I passed my hand over the table in front of me to pose, when I felt an extremely cold, chilling sensation in my hand and wrist, and told her to stop. When I looked at the photos, I was shocked. I have a series of 3 pictures where you can see that I'm switching around with a startled look on my face, shaking my hand, and there is a white cloud streaking through my hand and wrist in the photos that appears and disappears throughout the 3 frames. Needless to say, I was frightened. I was no longer willing to sleep on my own, so I took the bed with my mom. Yeah, sad, I know. My dad and sister slept a bit and went to walk around in the middle of the night in the boiler room where they said they had felt some weird stuff. I don't remember exactly what happened, but one of them felt a strong chill on their back. Meanwhile, I was sleeping and my mom suddenly woke and slammed her hand on the dresser. She said sorry and went back to sleep. She's never been a sleep mover, but whatever. I slept pretty deeply that night, but I kept being woken up by a super loud, clanking, rattling sound in the halls that sounded like the gurneys being wheeled back and forth. This is not a busy hotel, and in the middle of the desert. In the morning, my mom said she had a dream that there was a little boy and a young nurse talking to him. Then the nurse aged and became mean and scowling, and raised her hand to hit the boy. She said she then heard a voice telling her to hit him herself. This is why she hit the dresser. Keep in mind that this was a mental hospital, and one of the ghosts there is supposed to be a little boy, but no one knows why or how he died. When I was approximately 15 years old, circa 1988-89, myself and my family had 2 summer holidays in Portugal, one following on from the previous year. The first holiday included myself, my older sister, mom and dad, and an uncle and aunt. The second holiday the following summer was the same people, except my sister, who stayed at home. Both holidays were in the same location, and both times we stayed in the same villa, which was owned by a business associate of my uncle. As such, I believe the accommodation was free, and that's why it was such a great holiday option for us all. The villa was situated about a 15 minutes walk outside of a well-known town. The first holiday where my sister was also present was event-free, and nothing unexplained happened at all. The second holiday was where I alone experienced an absolutely terrifying paranormal event, which has stayed with me to this day. The villa we stayed in was on one level, as most villas are, and had a pretty standard layout. The main door at the front led straight into a kitchen, and that led into the main lounge area. Off to the left and the right of the main lounge were 2 ensuite bathrooms where my parents and uncle and aunt slept. I slept on a fold-out bed in the lounge area, and out to the back of the property was a small swimming pool. From memory, it was a very nice, spacious villa, and probably worth quite a bit of money. Nothing happened for the entire 2-week period that we were there, except for the final night of the holiday. I often say thank God that we flew home the next morning, because I don't think I could have stayed there another night. On this final evening, everyone had just gone to bed and closed their doors, and I had just finished setting up my bed and finally turned out the lights and got under the covers. No longer than 30 seconds after getting into bed, I began to hear tapping on one of the walls. I laid there trying to guess what it might be, and just figured that it was probably one of my parents or uncle or aunt doing something in their rooms, so I ignored it. I then heard the same tapping again, but louder. I sat up in bed and tried to pinpoint where it was coming from. This is how I know that it wasn't sleep paralysis, as some people have often suggested to me, because I was peering across the dimly lit lounge room. It was then that the tapping started to spin around the room, as if the knocking was circling me as I sat there. This was naturally pretty unnerving, and I struggled to rationalize what was taking place. It was at that point that the tapping stopped, and immediately a wooden chair from the lounge room dining table made a scraping sound against the wood parquet floor that it was resting on. The sort of scraping noise a chair would make if you pulled it out from under the table to sit on it. At this point I didn't know what was going on, and being as young as I was, I think fear got the better of me, and I shot down into the bed, turned around and pulled the sheets up under my chin and closed my eyes. But unfortunately, it didn't end there. Next, I heard more scraping as dining chairs were being moved, followed by a very quiet, but very distinct, shuffling noise, which sounded like shuffling footsteps. These footsteps got louder as whatever it was began to approach me in the room. As it approached, I then heard this mumbling in what sounded like guttural, low-key talking, but in a language that I didn't understand or recognize. It certainly wasn't Portuguese. On top of this mumbling, I suddenly began to hear this terrifying, rasping breathing in and out in a very rhythmic fashion, the sort of rasping that someone with severe breathing difficulty would make. This breathing got louder and louder until it was right behind me, right next to my head, on the pillow, rasping loudly into my right ear. Petrified doesn't even cut it. I was simply frozen with fear. I don't think I could have turned around, even if I had wanted to. This loud, heavy breathing continued for what seemed like a lifetime, but in reality was probably about 30 or 40 seconds, and then it slowly faded away, and the room was left in silence. I laid in the bed for about another hour, unable to sleep, and listening intently for anything else, but there was nothing. Eventually I fell asleep, probably through nervous exhaustion, and when I next woke up it was 6 a.m. and daylight filled the room, and I recall the sheer feeling of relief. The first thing I did was get up and looked at the dining table area, and sure enough, 2 chairs had been moved away from their normal resting positions, and not just by a small amount, but significantly so. I also checked the rest of the communal areas in the villa to see if any doors or windows had been left open, but there was nothing. When my family got up, I told them all about what had happened, and unfortunately I was met with mainly skepticism, which I found a little upsetting at the time. To be honest, I think the experience affected me to the degree where I probably needed to go get counseling to really process it and to help get over it. But of course nothing like that was available at the time. On May 9th of this year, I went to a flea market to browse. I passed by a clear cabinet that held an assortment of old antique dolls, and I was particularly drawn to an old, cracked doll wearing a hat with feathers. As I examined her closer, I noticed that she had a cloth body, but her arms, head, and legs were made of the same type of plastic, or possibly porcelain. I felt very drawn to her and was surprised by her price, only $35. She wasn't in very good condition, and was clearly ancient, based on the cracks on her body and the way that her face is painted on. I returned to the cashier with the doll, and immediately the workers who had been deep in conversation halted and fell quiet. They proceeded to tell me a little more about the doll, who supposedly hexes anyone who inconveniences her. This only made me feel more inclined to purchase her, as someone who is very interested in the paranormal, and as it is part of my faith, Wicca. So I ended up buying her. My younger sister, 11, wasn't very happy that I had bought the doll, whose name was Madame Leonora. She felt very thrown off by the doll's presence and requested that the doll be placed in the trunk on the ride home. I didn't want to upset the doll in case I got hexed, but my parents insisted that I put the doll in the trunk. So I did. That same day, I almost went to the hospital after an accident at my home. Similar disturbing events happened around the home whenever someone insulted Madame or did something she didn't like. These events pose a possible trauma trigger for some people, so I won't specify what the events were here. Just know that they were serious, and they were awful. I began giving Madame gifts and saying good morning and good night to her every day. On the first day that I gave her a gift, a package that I hadn't been expecting for another 2 weeks came in the mail. Every time I give her a gift, she gives me good luck. Madame and I had formed a friendship, but towards late June I began having strange, very specific dreams. In these dreams, Madame would climb down off of the shelf where she lives and escort me outside. We'd light candles and perform a ritual, and then I would bury Madame in a box with the gifts that I had given her over the months. As soon as the dream ends, I wake up. So, with the knowledge that I have because of my Wiccan faith, I decided to hold a seance of sorts in order to communicate with the spirit hosting my doll. I lit a candle and used a pendulum with a board to communicate. The candle flame responded to everything I said, and I have never seen such clear responses through my pendulum before. Based on what I got out of the session, Madame was able to tell me that she would like to be buried, but won't reveal to me why. I've never sensed any negative energy around Madame before, but with each passing day, the air in my room feels heavier, if that makes any sense. I'd like to fulfill her wish and bury her because I think she may be a Victorian mourning doll, but the vendors who sold her have no information on her at all, only that she makes bad things happen. If she is indeed a Victorian mourning doll, it would make sense why she wants to be buried. The only problem is that she refuses to tell me why I have to bury her. If anyone can tell me if there's any danger to burying her, if there's anything I should know about this, or what I can do to identify what time period she's from, I'd really appreciate the help. Believe it or not, my story is true. My name is Brandy, I am 56, and I live in Washington. All these years, my kids wanted me to write down events that happened to myself and my loved ones. Quite a few members of my family have recently passed away, leaving so many untold stories that I didn't want these experiences to die with me. So for my children, here it goes. A lot of messed up and supernatural things have happened to us in our lifetime, most with witnesses. This is one of them. About 27 years ago, while house hunting for a rental, I met the former renter of this run-down but livable house. She warned me not to live in this house because I have small children. And not only was it run down, it was very haunted, and never, she was stern, never let a man live here with you because he will be taken over by the evil that resides within. Now, I'm thinking she's either crazy or she was just mad at the landlord for something. We needed a home incredibly desperately. I was also thinking that I had lived through worse, and houses could always be cleansed, so I blew it off. I ended up renting the house, but I soon realized that I should have heeded her warning. The house was musty and old, made of wood. The walls, the ceilings, and the floors were all wood. Even the bedroom doors blended in with the walls, but the bedrooms were painted on the other side. There were French doors all along the front of the house going into an enclosed but open-viewed screen porch with a front door. The main living space was long and open. The living and dining area were stretched into one long room, and it was always cold despite having the heater on and it being in the desert. It was located in the high desert of California on the corner of an acre lot of barren desert, and across the street there was a popular grocery store and a few small shops too far away for anyone to hear us. It served as a town hall back in the day, and I think a turkey ranch before that. It was 6 a.m., and we had planned a 3-day trip to the happiest place in the world, Disneyland. My kids, Michael, age 1, Penny, age 4, and Jenny, age 3, were all sleeping on my bed in our bedroom at the other end of the house so I could pack in peace for the trip in the dining room and not wake them. I could see the bedroom door, though, and it was closed. I was standing up folding clothes at the table. My boyfriend's mother, Opal, was sitting across from me when we heard the bedroom door creak open slightly. We both looked up, and it was my daughter Jenny in her little pink and white flowered onesie. I said, "Now you know it's too early, go back to bed." And she replied, "Me up now, Mommy," in her little sweet voice. It made us both chuckle, and I told Opal that I thought she was just excited. I told her no, that we weren't going right now, so please go back to bed. She stomped her foot, which we could feel vibrate through the floorboards. Opal then told me that I had better go and put her back, and I agreed. As I was making that long walk toward her, I was keeping eye contact, and as I was walking, I was telling her, "No, baby," and once again she stomps her foot, smiles, and says louder, "Me up." with the sweetest little smile, and she tilted her head. Opal even muttered, "Aw." It didn't dawn on me at the time how perfect that her little pigtails were. At this point, I'm extending my hands toward her. I get about 6 inches from touching her, and all of a sudden she turned black and disappeared, almost like sand falling to the ground, followed by the door quickly closing behind her. Opal said, "What the hell?" in surprise. Shocked, I stood there with my hands still extended, and then the fear ran through my body like hot and cold needles. My kids were all sleeping behind that door. I grabbed the handle and swung open the door, fearing the worst, only to find my little Jenny fast asleep with her sister's leg over her. Whatever we had seen, it couldn't have been her. Although unsettling, Opal and I didn't talk about what had happened, and later that morning we all piled into the car and went on our trip. We had a great time, but when we came home we were met with all of the lights on and old music playing loudly coming from inside. People were standing around in my living room. 2 separate groups, like 2 different periods of time. I turned to my boyfriend and asked how those people got in and if he left the door unlocked. He told me, "No, why the hell would I do that? You saw me lock it." We all got out of the car and cautiously approached the front door. As I got closer, I could see a couch not where our couch was, with a man in a white tank top sitting there. He was dirty, and he was looking at this boy standing in the corner with such hatred. You could tell the boy was abused by the way that he was standing there with his head down. That's when he looked up at me, and it pierces my soul even now just to think about him. The kids were scared, and the dog was growling. I grabbed the doorknob to put my key in. Just then the music stopped, and the lights went out. We opened the door, and nothing had been moved, and no one was there. I couldn't get the image of that sad-looking little boy out of my mind, and it was a while before I saw him again. It was a nice day. My boyfriend and his mother were still at a doctor's appointment, and the kids and I were out grocery shopping, having a good time. I usually kept the living room light on when I knew that we were going to get home after dark. I didn't realize we would be gone that long, and it was just starting to be dusk. I pulled into the gate, and I think the kids were a little too rambunctious, too much spare change, quarter machine candy, I guess. I sat for a moment, planning my attack with getting all these groceries, a sleeping baby, and the 2 girls up the steps and into the house, when I noticed movement in the living room. No one was home. I could hardly even see anything in there because the light wasn't on. I started to get out when the girls jumped out of the car and started running for the steps. I yelled for them to stop and ran over to them. We could hear noises like a child running around, and my eldest daughter to this day says that she saw a little boy and describes him to a T, but at that moment I thought that it might be an intruder or something like that. 3 steps went up to a landing, a locked front door opening into a windowed screened-in porch, and then the 3 French doors. I told the kids to go to the car, but they were too scared to leave my side. Both of them were clutching the back of my shirt. I armed myself with a huge stick by the landing and forged on. I burst through the front door to the porch, and he was there, his face in his 2 hands cupped against the glass, as if he was peering out, and then he vanished. It was the boy that I had seen standing in the corner before. We went inside and I searched every room with my obviously frightened children practically glued to my side. There was no one there. Was my mind playing tricks on me, and I was projecting my fear onto the girls? I turned on all the lights and ran out to get my sleeping baby and the rest of the groceries out of the car when I stopped in my tracks. There on the glass were 2 crescent moon handprints, and it was fogged up where his nose was. It stayed there for at least 20 minutes. Just to add my own thoughts here, I don't feel that we always need words to communicate with spirits, or for them to get a message to us. They are not bound by flesh. It is important that you have an open mind and always keep your will strong. At night, you could look out the French doors at the stores across the street and see the vast desert behind them. The property was pitch black, so you saw the reflection of yourself and whatever was behind you. That night, everyone was asleep. It was nearly Christmas, so I was admiring the lights decorating the storefronts when I felt one of my children through the floorboards skip up next to me, and then I heard a faint giggle. I felt a tug on my shirt, so I turned my gaze to the reflection, extending my arm over as if to caress the back of his head and pull him in next to me. It didn't occur to me that this was not my child. He came in under my arm and stood there looking up at me, and all I could feel was love and sorrow. I turned to look at him, but he was gone. So I looked back at his reflection, and it was gone as well. He was about 7 or 8 years old. He had what looked like black and white Converse on, and was wearing old jeans with rolled-up cuffs. I could see the edge of a white t-shirt under a light gray sweatshirt, and his hair was sandy blonde and wisped to the side with the sweetest smile. In that moment, I felt everything that he was feeling, and I cried. I saw the images of abuse flash through my head. I don't want to elaborate on that, and he made me feel that the man was not his father, and that he loved the comfort of our presence. There were so many emotions. I went to bed and held my kids tight. I was so full of questions, like what happened to his mom? How did he die? I looked for records and was told that back in the day there were not many records kept out there in the desert. A person could live and die, and no one would know unless it was specifically reported. I felt whatever else was in the house was evil, and we found out just how evil it was the longer that we lived there. I feel I should describe the bedroom so that you can get a feel of the surroundings. On one side of the room there was my full-size bed against the wall, and a single bed next to me against the other wall, separated by a small nightstand with a lamp where my 2 little girls slept. The door to the living room was next to their bed, and at our feet was the hall door and closet. Many nights, we would see the light beneath the door get blocked out, as if someone were walking up to my room just standing there, and then they would fade away. At first we thought it was just Opal going to the bathroom, since it was right next to our room, but we found out later that it wasn't her, because she was frail and had to use a potty chair in her room. The dog would sometimes growl and scratch, but when we opened the door to the hall, no one was ever there. Almost every morning at 6 a.m., we could hear the lid to the toilet slam up and the toilet flush, but when we ran in there, the lid was down and the water was still. A phone would start ringing in my room despite us not even having one, and we would hear old music coming from the walls from time to time. At first we thought that it was coming from the pipes of our neighbor or something like that, but we didn't have any neighbors because the lady had already moved out, and that house was completely empty. So many things happened there, but this night in particular caused me to never let my girls sleep in their own bed alone. The girls were so happy that day. They had both received a package from my mom full of princess stuff. Toys, cups, and bowls, 2 beach towels, and 2 nightgowns embossed with their favorite princess images. The nightgowns were short and silky, and after their bath they begged to wear them to bed, so I happily complied. It was quiet in the house that night. Opal was with family along with my boyfriend, and I don't remember where the dog was, but he wasn't present anyway. I tucked them in, oldest by the wall and youngest closest to me on the outside. I wasn't ready for sleep, so I put a scarf over the lamp to dim the light, so that I could still read. Now I was sitting on my bed next to them, and as I was reading, the covers slightly came down off of the girls. I didn't really think anything of it because my oldest daughter was notorious for kicking off the blankets, so I tucked them both in and continued reading. It happened again, and once again I covered them back up. At this point I was starting to feel uneasy and the hairs on my arms were beginning to raise. Never a good sign. I looked at my oldest daughter and noticed that she hadn't moved. So how was this happening? I sat back down on my bed and pretended to read while intently staring at the covers over the book pages, feeling my heart pound through my chest. Moments passed, and I felt myself trembling, trying to hold the book steady, and then it happened. I saw the covers start to move, but the girls were still. I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on. The covers were then pulled down with force, so I leapt up and grabbed the covers from the end of the bed, pulling them up. At this point, I was standing next to them and my voice quivered as I yelled at whatever was in the room to stay away from my girls. I still don't know who I was yelling at. I sat on the bed next to them, gripping the covers tight, when they were jerked from my hands down to the foot of the bed, exposing my girls' legs. My youngest daughter's nightgown started to rise up to the top of her thigh. She started to scream and grabbed at her leg as if she were feeling pain, waking her sister. I threw my body over both girls and screamed at whatever it was to get out and leave us alone repeatedly. I tried my best to calm the girls down and protect them. We stayed huddled together all night. This was the last time they slept alone in that house. I was able to get a bigger bed, and we all slept together from that point forward. At this point, I'm sure you're wondering, why didn't we just leave? Believe me, I wanted to, but I felt trapped. Not just by the house, but also by my boyfriend. Let me start by saying that Bill was not the nicest man. Oh yeah, from the outside he was great. He had a charming voice, and he made people laugh. Nobody thought that he was capable of doing the things that he did. They didn't know him like I did. I feel he tricked me when we first got together. I was young and impressionable. He knew I had low self-esteem, so he made me feel like I wasn't good enough for anyone else and was lucky to have him. We had children together. I knew what he was capable of, and let's just say that I didn't want to lose anyone I loved, so that's why I didn't leave him. But this was different. This was not him. This was an entirely new level of evil. I started noticing a shift in him the longer that we lived in that house. We stopped going out as a family, and he stopped working. He put bars on the windows and one-way locks on all the doors with only one key. Not even his mother cared. She would go into her bedroom and shut the door so that she didn't have to hear me scream or our children cry when he sometimes hit me. And like always, he made me feel like it was my fault. Living there changed him, though. The things he started to do were out of his character, and that made me more uncomfortable. He started watching me from dark rooms and behind cracks in the doors. When I asked him why he was doing this, he got mad and made me feel like I was crazy. When we were alone together in that house, it was even more intense. One such night, the kids were at my mother's, and we had just finished dinner. We were sitting together on the couch watching TV, and I was mending a sock. It had been a pretty good day. I noticed a change in the atmosphere, and for some reason, he seemed to have gotten quiet. I was just about to ask him if he wanted me to change the channel, when a small flash of light hit my right eye. It wasn't until shortly after trying to find the source that I realized he was staring at me the whole time through a little piece of broken mirror in his right hand, hidden by the throw cover. My God, those eyes weren't his. I know him. This was not my person sitting next to me, and I was frightened to the core. He didn't even realize that I saw this, so I sprung up. His mom just had a phone installed, so I'm trying to call my mother and check on the kids. He jumped and hid the mirror in the couch cushions and started trying to reason with me as to why I should come back and sit down next to him and not make that phone call. I noticed that while he was talking, he wasn't even looking at me. He was looking behind my head, almost as if he were looking through me. I glanced at my reflection in the glass door, but nothing was behind me. I grabbed the phone and called my mother, assuring him that I was only going to be a minute. We stayed on the phone until he fell asleep, and quite a bit longer. My mother knew what was going on, but she felt helpless, as I did at that time. He got up, grumbling something as he walked into the bedroom to go to sleep on the bed, so after we hung up, I stayed awake with the blanket on the couch covering everything but my eyes while listening to him breathe until dawn, when I finally fell asleep. There was another time at around 4 p.m. We needed some groceries for dinner, so I got the girls ready and left my baby boy asleep in his playpen in the living room. Opal was napping at the dining room table, and my Bill was sitting on the edge of our bed in the bedroom. I called out to him that I was leaving, and to keep an ear out for the baby, but he didn't respond, so I repeated myself and I heard him mutter, "Yeah, sure." So we left. The store didn't have something his mother wanted, so I had to go to 2 stores. It had just gotten dark as we pulled up, and I could hear the baby crying. I rushed in, and Bill's mother was still sitting at the table. I picked up my son, and he was soaking wet, and it looked like he had been crying for a while. I was changing his diaper, trying to calm him down, and the whole time Opal was getting mad at me for leaving her alone with the baby. I was furious, and I told her I didn't. I left him with your son. She looked surprised. She didn't even know that he was home. What the hell? Where was he? I put my son down and told the girls to go play. Something wasn't right. I didn't think he was still in the bedroom because the lights were off, but someone was in there. It was abnormally dark. I slowly went up to the door and walked in. There was a dim light coming in through a crack in the blinds, and I saw his silhouette still sitting on the bed. He hadn't moved. His feet were on the floor, and he was slightly hunched forward with his elbows resting on his legs, cupping his hands together. The room smelled stuffy, and the air was thick. I called out his name, but he didn't reply. Once again I called out his name, adding, "You're scaring me." I moved closer, saying, "Why are you not answering me?" I saw that he was sweating and that it was glistening in the light and dripping from his head to his hands and then his hands to the floor. I could hear it as it dripped. I was shaking while I slowly made my way around him to the lamp, and I heard a growl that almost sounded like it was coming up from the floorboards. I turned the lamp on. His shirt was soaking wet. There was a pool of sweat at his feet, and his eyes were darker than I've ever seen them. His stare was fixated downward. I was afraid to get near him, but I felt like he needed my help. I started to shake him while calling out his name. He was cold to the touch. I crouched down in front of him between his legs, but honestly, all I wanted to do was run out of that room. I took his face in my shaking hands and said, "Please, Bill." Just like that, he snapped out of it. He grabbed both of my wrists and hurled me onto the bed behind him. He said in a loud voice, "What are you doing, you freak?" Then he got up and went to the bathroom. I heard him turn on the shower as I laid there curled up, not knowing what had just happened. I soon composed myself and went out to bring in the groceries and make dinner. Later he joined us as if nothing had ever happened, but I still felt uneasy. The night went on, and he was his old self, goofing off with the kids and watching cartoons. I went into the kitchen and started washing dishes with my back to the hall. I heard him in the living room with the kids. I swear, I heard him. The next thing I knew, he was behind me, and he aggressively grabbed my waist and put his mouth on me. I could feel his teeth on my neck. I jumped. He startled me. Then he looked at me like he wanted me dead and said, "You disgust me," and left the house. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. All I know is that he was gone. He came back later that next morning, dirty, and saying something about him getting lost in the desert. I remember him telling me once that I could scream out there and no one would hear me. We eventually got out of that house after living through horror, not knowing from day to day what was going to happen next, and who was safe from that evil. Later, after his mother had moved into her daughter's house, she passed away. I felt bad because I wasn't even sad about it. I found a way to leave Bill. I made an excuse that I needed to pick up a check from the welfare department and that I had to bring the kids with me. After I got there, I told them that I was being abused, and they helped me find a safe place to go. After I didn't return that day, a detective from the sheriff's department came and asked me questions about him because apparently he stole a child and took her to that empty house. Thank God he was caught before he could do anything to her. I never let him hurt my children, but sadly, they remember him hurting me. For years after that, I would have nightmares of him appearing at the foot of my bed, clawing his way up my legs, and closing the space between our faces with his cold breath on my lips and those eyes. I would wake up gasping for air. About 9 years ago, I looked up his name and found him on a website exposing predators. I still shiver when I see small mirrors or broken glass. A few years after we moved out, I ran into the former renter, so I asked her if she knew anything about a little boy ever living there, or did someone die there, and she said, now this is not fact. She said that she heard, I don't know where though, that there was a boy and his mother disappeared, leaving him with his stepdad, who is horribly abusive. Later, the boy was found stuffed in a hole on the property, dead, and they found the stepfather's dried and decayed body on the couch in the living room. He had committed suicide. Like I said, I don't know if that's true, but it seemed pretty damn close to how I felt. I wish even now that I could have helped that sweet little boy move on. We couldn't even drive down that street for years after that, and we all cried with relief many years later when we found out that the house had been demolished to the ground and that a housing tract was being built over the land. I still wonder if those people living there are plagued by the same evil that plagued us. When I was younger, I used to be obsessed with ghosts and all sort of haunting shows. Now, I'd never particularly had a reason to believe that my house was haunted, but one day my brother came home claiming to have found $10 out of nowhere. I'll never know for sure if he was just messing with me, but after curiosity got a hold, I asked him where he really got the money from. Stupid me assumed maybe a friend? Perhaps he stole it from my parents' wallet? My parents never claimed to have been missing any money, however, something they definitely would have voiced being distraught about had they noticed that we had taken their cash. The story he gave me was that a young girl, maybe about the age of 7, had followed him onto the school bus that afternoon. He had never met this girl before, and had never seen her around at school, but she decided to sit in the seat right in front of him. After riding the bus for a while, she started to talk to him. Nobody else could see her, according to him, and the other kids were giving him weird looks. Eventually, she handed him $10 with a note, and then subsequently got off the bus at the next stop. I immediately assumed that he was lying and laughed, of course. I asked him to show me the note, which he promptly retrieved from his room and passed me a tiny piece of paper. A shiver ran down my spine, as the note wasn't in his handwriting. It read, "I'll help you, but only this time," which I believe was in response to the fact that my brother was begging my parents for a Zelda charm bracelet for months, which they refused to buy him. Given that he had $10 now, he could just buy it himself, though. Of course, I was extremely intrigued by this, even if it sounded absurd. I suggested we make a makeshift Ouija board to see if we could contact anyone. So we wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and grabbed a necklace to hover above the DIY board. My brother was interested too, so he decided it could be fun. Mind you, I was in 6th grade and he was in the 4th at the time, so any sort of movement from the necklace caught our attention and we immediately thought that it was a ghost. After asking a few questions, the necklace began to move and shake. Either my brother was really good at tricking me by slowly sliding the necklace across the board, or it really was something paranormal. We were able to get a name. Kate. After asking dumb things like, "Did you watch me complete the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time?" and getting a yes, me and my brother decided to stop for the night after starting to get creeped out. We never said goodbye before ending. Eventually, playing with the board would be a daily occurrence. We thought we'd made a friend, and truly believed that someone was talking to us. Me and my brother decided to take things a step further and try to record something. So we both got our tablets, placed them in front of our TV, and hit record. The first thing I asked was, if someone was here, move something in the room. There was nothing. Okay, well, maybe the ghost is shy? We decided to repeat the same question, but this time we said that we would leave the room and give it a minute. We went downstairs for 5 minutes, and when we got back up, our tablets had both fallen to the floor and stopped recording. Coincidence? I mean, things fall, especially when you're not careful at placing them. So we brushed it off. In December of 6th grade, though, things got really weird. I had started hearing voices in my head, claiming that they were the ghost I was talking to while playing the Ouija board. I got so scared one night that I had grabbed the Bible that one of my religious friends had gifted me, and would sleep with it. Eventually, I told my mom that there was a ghost telling me scary things. I won't get into detail, as some of it was a little graphic. She and my dad argued for a while about whether or not I was schizophrenic, and if I should see a therapist. So, out of fear, I never told them that I was hearing voices again, but I would space out often, talking and having conversations with this thing that I believed to be a ghost. Eventually, I forgot about the ghost, and we no longer talked. I will never know what that voice was, if I was genuinely insane, or if they were just intrusive thoughts. I was just glad for it finally to have stopped. Nothing necessarily paranormal has happened to me since, besides my TV turning on randomly in the middle of the night, or feeling that someone was pushing my legs with some sort of unknown force every once in a while. I sum it up to just be my imagination playing tricks on me now. But I do still have this looming feeling that ever since I've played with that Ouija board, I have some sort of spirit attached to me, following me. Not a bad one, but just a constant presence. I think my paranormal story began when I was around 5 or 6 years of age. I was a shy and quiet little girl, but nothing in my life was out of the ordinary. I had both of my parents married, and a little brother 3 years younger than me that was sleeping in the same room as me. I don't know exactly how or when it all began, but things started to get weird at night in my bedroom. Every time my mother put me to bed and turned off the lights, shadows would begin to move around and scare me. By shadows, I mean black entities, like little insects crawling on the walls, standing figures with human shapes, even faces. I was so terrified of the night that I had a hard time falling asleep, and I can't recount how many times I had to turn on my little bed light to chase away the shadows that I was seeing. Nothing bad ever happened to me during those days. These shadows were always just passing by or staring at me, even though I recalled some times that were scarier than others. I remembered one particular night when I opened my eyes and there was just a face, centimeters away from mine, staring at me with dead eyes. I was on top of a bunk bed. Every time something scary would happen to me, my instinct was to turn on a light. Everything disappeared with the light, so I made a habit to save myself like this. And now, at 26 years old, I still need to turn on the lights everywhere I go because I cannot feel at ease in the dark. Of course, I told my experiences to my parents at the time, but they did not really take me seriously. I was quite imaginative for my age, so they thought it was just my silly little brain making things up. At the same time, my vision was starting to get bad and I needed to wear glasses. They used to tell me my blurred vision was creating scary monsters with the things in my room. Every time I was seeing the things in my room, I kept repeating my parents' words to soothe me, but I was still so scared, trembling, and unable to sleep because of what I was seeing. I had bad sleeping habits because of that. I had hard times closing my eyes at night, and I always tried to fall asleep before there was no light left in the house. These experiences followed me my whole childhood, but with the years passing by, they were less frequent. The fear of the dark still lingered, but I could sleep more peacefully. When I reached my teenage years, it completely stopped. At times, I was even able to completely forget this part of my life. Funny how I never thought my house was haunted. I always knew deep down that it was my problem to bear. The rest of my family never had any paranormal experiences in this house, and none of them were particularly inclined to hear about my fear of the shadows. Even though I stopped seeing things after my 12th or 13th birthday, I still had quite the instinct for the paranormal, and I was able to feel if a place was bad or not. But I want to make it clear that I was not seeking paranormal thrills. In fact, I was avoiding those things like the plague. I was still very much traumatized, and I did not want to experience scary things like that ever again. So I cannot recall if it was during my 14th or 15th birthday years, but I had my final, most horrifying encounter. I was on vacation at my friend's grandmother's house. It was quite an old house, and there were 2 beds in this bedroom for my friend and me to go to sleep. I had slept in this room many nights before without anything happening, and nothing during the evening could explain what took place next. I woke up in the middle of the night with no explanation. I don't remember having a bad dream or hearing something. I just opened my eyes in the complete darkness. The feeling of uneasiness crept in very quickly. Something was not right. I could feel it, but I wasn't sure what yet. I finally lifted my head and saw it. Words cannot describe how horrid the thing I saw was, and how terrified I felt in that instant. Just 2 meters away from me, at the end of my bed, stood a man that I can only describe as grotesque. The man had red skin, or so I thought at first, prominent eyes, and an all-teeth smile. It was standing still and staring directly at me. We looked at each other for what felt like hours with no one moving. I was able to see every detail of it. More than 10 years later, I'm able to describe it perfectly to you. Its image is still ingrained in my brain like I was marked by a hot iron. Its red skin was actually no skin at all. It was made out of muscles, and its eyes and teeth were very apparent because it had neither eyelid nor lip. Its face was horribly deformed because there were several metal pieces under its muscles that were coming out at random places. It wore a black leather trench coat. I cannot tell you how terrified that I was. My heart plummeted to my stomach and my body felt an uncomfortable hotness within. It was the first time that I was seeing something so vivid and real, and my instincts were screaming that I was in great danger. I could not take my eyes off of the red man. Somehow I knew that I should not let it out of my sight. I didn't scream or panic, but I frantically searched for the light switch that I knew was within reach. The red man was standing still, just looking back at me. I don't know why, but I knew that it was completely amused by the situation and how scared that I was. Finally, I turned on the light, and I thought that I was saved. Remember how the light always helped me chase away the shadows? Well, this time, it did not fucking work. It was still there. It was still staring at me, and I could see it more clearly than ever. It began to shift away, getting closer to my friend's bed. Speaking of my friend, of course he woke up from the light that I had just turned on. He turned toward me, asking me what was happening. I think he knew immediately that something was very wrong from the face that I was probably making and my eyes locked on something next to his bed. He kept turning his head toward the red man that I was looking at, but he obviously was not able to see it. My friend kept asking what was wrong again and again, more panicked each time he was inquiring. I was so horrified that my lips were sealed, so I was not able to respond. The whole event took less than a minute to unfold, but here I was, completely terrified and spooking my friend to death. Finally, the red man began to fade away into thin air. During all this time, it did not break eye contact with me. It did not move its arms or its legs. It just kept staring at me with its eyes, with no eyelids, and staring at me with no lips. To this day, I have no explanation for it. It was neither a vivid dream, nor a sleep paralysis, and I know what I saw. To further validate my experience, let me tell you another weird thing I experienced not many years ago related to this story. After forgetting about this horrible nightmare for a decade, I happened to tell the story to my father. I was still very surprised by how vividly I could recall the events of that night, and how I could describe its face precisely. I was in an almost trance-like state while taking a bath after that, still thinking about what had happened. I was recreating the red man's face in my head. I began to stare at my own face in the mirror, a mirror that was at least 2.5 meters away from me. I stared at myself for minutes without really thinking about it, just having the red man's face in mind. Somehow, a feeling of uneasiness began to stir in me. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was at first. I kept staring at my face, in my trance-like state, until I finally realized what was not right with the situation. I was able to see my face. Remember how I told you my eyesight was bad? Well, it did not improve with time. In fact, it got really bad, and without my glasses, I can't see things clearly at all. And here I am, in my bathtub, seeing things clearly for the first time since my toddler years. I got really spooked, and the moment that I realized what was happening, I saw my vision getting blurrier and blurrier. I don't know what to make of the last story. I just wanted to tell you everything that happened to me. I have my own theories, but, again, I do not seek any truth, and I still avoid paranormal things like the plague. Well, that's about it, folks. I hope my experience was interesting to some of you. It was weird and unsettling for me to put words to these events. I feel like every time I mention these things, I put myself closer to the shadows and the red man that still haunt my nightmares to this day. As I said before, I did not experience anything relevant after my teenage years, but the fear of the dark and what it hides is still here. When I was in middle school, my mother and father did not live together. Eventually, we all moved into this apartment together in the local town. The local town is peaceful, calm, and barely any crime happens here. Obviously, when you're a kid, you can get scared of the dark and stuff like that. However, this wasn't just being afraid of what lurks in the darkness, because there was actually something watching me as I fell asleep. The first night I slept there, I just kept getting the feeling as if something was staring at me from the hallway. My bed was almost completely centered to where the door was, and my door was always open, so I would always be able to see what was outside. And I would just stare, always, down the hallway, thinking that something was looking back at me. It wasn't long after that before I started actually having paranormal encounters. The first paranormal encounter I ever had, one night I was sleeping in my bed. I remember feeling like something was watching me again, except this time I rolled over to see a large, black, shadowy man standing in my doorway. My eyes began to tear up, and I hid under my sheets, but this strange pressure came over my body. It was almost as if I couldn't breathe or talk, and then my ears would start ringing, and I would fall asleep with a snap of a finger. Then I would have this nightmare of my parents coming into my room slowly, coming over to my bedside table, and screaming at me. Their faces would just rot away into this deep, black shadow face, which I named Black Eyes. I would then wake up, usually in a completely different room, not knowing what I was doing. Sometimes I would be standing in the bathroom, or laying on the couch in the living room. A few times I would be standing over my parents' bed, just looking at them. This event reoccurred more times than I can even count. Then, finally, my family began to notice the figure as well. My mother at the time would have friends over and they would say something like, "Did you just see that man walk down your hallway?" She would see it too. The same thing that I saw that would stare at me and put me to sleep at night. There would be strange events around the apartment, such as the TV changing channels, random phone calls from unknown numbers in the middle of the night. One of the most random occurrences in the house would be the random, horrible smell of death coming from the bathroom. This happened about once a week at a random hour. Nobody could figure out why the bathroom would smell like rotting death, and no matter how hard my mother attempted to clean the bathroom, the smell would not go away until about 2 hours later. It would just randomly disappear, with no explanation as to what it could have been. Many people who came over would see this shadow figure. My father didn't want to believe it, as he didn't believe in ghosts, but my mother was fully prepared. She had lived in a haunted house before and wasn't surprised by what was happening. Nobody would act like they believed me when I tried to tell them what I was seeing and why I was sleepwalking at night, but in reality, I think my mother was scared. She didn't want to tell me, with me being a kid and all, that I was possibly being possessed by this shadow man and being forced to walk around the house at night. Then came one night when we had to call the police. There was music coming from downstairs around 1 to 2 a.m. We knew that the downstairs neighbors had just moved out of the apartment, but we were awoken by this church-type music. We informed the police, and they came down to the apartment only to find a locked door. They busted it down to find absolutely nothing but music on a track playing by itself in the middle of the room. We were informed of this, and that only created more of a mystery. It was evident by that point that there was something in that apartment. Something dark. Something that didn't have good intentions. Eventually, after a few years, we decided it was time to move out. We had gotten a puppy, and she was barking down the hallway at nothing, and one night a plate fell onto the ground from the cabinet. It was time to go. The final night in the apartment, my mother and I both awakened to a horrible noise of what sounded like a chainsaw destroying the kitchen cabinets. We both ran out to turn on the lights and find absolutely nothing. We both looked at each other like, "Did you hear that?" But couldn't say anything, and went back to bed. It was completely terrifying. I'm not sure what we were dealing with at this apartment. I'd like to say that it was just a ghost, but it seemed powerful. I've always felt that someone was watching me, always with me, just watching, but nobody was to be seen. It was one night during a November break after my birthday, around 2:30, when I started to feel sick, so I got up to use the bathroom. My room was in the basement right next to my parents'. I left my room, and we have this hallway. I walked down, and it was pitch black. I was going up to the door that leads to the stairs, and for a quick second, there was just a girl standing there, and then she just floated up and disappeared. I was so scared, but I really had to use the bathroom, and we only have one that was upstairs, so I continued my journey and used the bathroom. It took me about 20 minutes to get my head together, and then I went back downstairs to bed. Since I moved into this house, 3 a.m. has always been scary to me because I hear a lot of things, and my parents just think that I'm crazy. But the clock hit 3 a.m. I was already scared for my life, and I said, I'm just going to try to go to bed. I tried for about 10 minutes, and it felt like I was being watched still, so I said, "Hello, is anybody there?" No one answered. But a moment later, my painting fell off the wall and hit the shelf that was holding my mirror, to fall and shatter. I've always had a spooky feeling about that mirror, and I was crying in fear. After I calmed down, around 3:50, I was going to bed again, and I felt a tug on my foot, but just pushed it away. After the third time, I sat up and saw the same girl from earlier. Her bright green eyes glowed, but her long, blue, scruffy dress was beautiful. It was scary, but I felt like I've seen her somewhere, or she looked really familiar to me and looked like a younger version of me. Ever since then, I haven't heard a word or peep out of anything, but I still feel her presence. I used to work as a cleaner when I was 16 and between colleges. This is the UK, so I had already left school. The place where I worked was a popular clothing store near my house and was built over ancient farmland. There were also rumors of druid burial grounds nearby, but that's another story. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal from a very young age, but this was by far the most haunted place I've ever worked, and my first apparition sighting. We were a team of 4 to 5 people, and all of us were assigned to different parts of the store. One of the sections was the women's fitting rooms. We would vacuum the rugs and cubicles, polish the mirrors, and all of that. You would hear high heels on the tiles the whole time that you were down there, and the sounds of rustling paper, coat hangers rattling, that kind of thing. There was also a general feeling of discomfort and unease, as though you were being followed and watched. This is hours before the store opened, so of course there were no customers. Sometimes a manager would be there, but they stayed upstairs in the office. The next part was the men's clothing area, which was on the second floor. When you cleaned there, you were alone but for the occasional manager walking through. One time I was on the floor cleaning the railings by the cash registers, and a huge black shadow swept over me. I was surprised because I hadn't heard anybody approach, and as I looked around, I was definitely alone. My cleaning routine was to sweep the floor and collect the dirt into little piles around the pillars, then sweep it up all in one go at the end. The dirt piles moved constantly. I would go back to do the final big sweep, and some of the piles always would have disappeared. After I clocked out, the piles would be there again. I had a sense that the spirit was a young male farmhand who was very mischievous. I said as much to my coworker, and she told me that she refuses to clean in that area after polishing the mirrors one day and seeing the disembodied head of a young man peering over her shoulder. Aside from my instances with the piles, I would always hear the sound of coat hangers rattling and shuffling noises, but I never felt threatened by it. I used to laugh it off or just tell the spirit to stop, and he would most of the time. Now, after the store was clean, we would clean the staff quarters, toilets and canteen, meeting rooms. The toilets were a non-paranormal horror in themselves. Note, I worked here with my mother. We were assigned to clean the female toilets, and usually if someone was using them, we would leave and give them privacy until they finished. So we went in, the middle stall was closed, and we heard rustling paper and heavy breathing. So we left and waited. And waited. And waited. The cleaning cupboard was right next to the toilets, and didn't even have a door. We would have seen and heard anybody who might have left. To leave and enter the toilets, you would have to walk straight past the open doorway and then walk down the corridor that directly faced it. It was an L-shaped corridor, with the toilets on the far end and the cleaning cupboard on the corner. Except when we went in after waiting 10 to 15 minutes, the middle stall door was wide open and empty. Now, on to the apparition. The children's clothing area was generally less creepy. There were coat hangers moving again. Sometimes things would fall off the shelves and rails, but we always just shrugged it off. The elevator was directly opposite the children's clothing, and we usually loaded our cleaning equipment into the elevator because it was too heavy to carry up the stairs. I remember rinsing my mop out, and I glanced up. There was a little boy around 6 or 7 years old, standing directly in front of me. He wore a flat cap, a pale shirt with suspenders, dark shorts, and socks up to his knees. At first I thought it was a mannequin, and when I blinked, he was gone. I thought I was just tired, and I shook my head. I spoke to my mother about it later, as she's Wiccan and super into the supernatural, and I described the boy to her. She had seen the exact same child a few weeks before, but only the back of him, as if he had been walking around a corner. She told me that she had the feeling he had died of lung-related issues, perhaps tuberculosis or pneumonia. So there you have it. Some of it can be explained by tiredness, I know, but I just thought I would share this experience. To begin with, I should explain some basic personal history. Real names will not be revealed, obviously. I have a family of 5 plus 2 spouses. My parents, my 2 brothers, my oldest brother's wife, and mine. Before getting married and moving out with my wife, I lived in the same house for 19 years. My parents bought it when I was like 6 months old, and I got married during college, so I've only ever known that house and my current apartment. I had some traumatic experiences when I was very young that are tied to one of the rooms in my parents' house, and then a few years later my parents had me move into that room. During my time in that room, I started having vicious nightmares, all involving me watching helplessly as the people that I loved were brutally murdered in graphic and creative ways in which one constant fixture was a figure that seemed to be observing everything and watching me from a distance, never directly interacting with the chaos, but always on the edge of my vision. This figure always looked the same. A tall mass of complete opaque blackness, with the exception of an antlered animal skull where its head should be. Anyway, when I went to college, moving out of that room, the nightmares stopped completely. I didn't have a single one until I came home for winter break and stayed in that room again. During that break, my then fiancé stayed a few nights at my house with me. We slept in separate rooms, but both on the same floor. During the night, she texted me that she was having a panic attack, and that she thought she was seeing a figure. When I asked what it looked like, she described the figure from my dreams exactly, and I told her to start reading Psalms in the hopes that it might help. She immediately felt better. Not sure if it was because of the scripture itself, or if it was just a placebo, but I am a firm Christian, so I believe that it helped. We talked for a while about it before deciding to keep an eye out for more spooky shit. That night, I had the worst nightmare of my life. The next morning, I felt numb and out of commission, and I didn't fully recover until the next day. Every time I've gone back to that house since, I have felt an overwhelming, malicious presence there. It has the effect of weighing down on everything. It kind of feels like cotton in your ears, and making everything feel super depressing. Recently, there was another development. My grandfather passed away this last semester, and my grandmother moved into the house with my parents. She's a troubled person, and she brought a lot of toxicity and conflict to the home. Last time I was there with my wife, we immediately felt something horrifyingly evil. I've always had a sensitivity to spiritual things, and it was like nothing that I have felt before. I think that it was feeding off of the conflict in the house and making things worse. My cat, who we had brought with us, immediately slipped into what looked like a super depressive state. She wouldn't play or do anything, no matter how hard we tried. The kicker was the time that I decided to try something. I walked into my old room, the one tied to my traumatic experiences, and tried to feel for any sort of extra bad energy. It was tangible. My mom and I had repainted that room the last time I was down there, and it felt very cathartic, but the power was still ever present. On an instinct, I touched a wall in the room and immediately had violent visions reliving my trauma, except the spirit was there, watching and seemingly gloating. It felt like it was trying to rub what had happened in my face like a "look what I'm capable of" sort of thing. My wife told me that I went white as a sheet and began shaking and crying, but I don't remember it. It behooves me here to add that I have seen several therapists about my traumatic experience. I don't think it was a PTSD flashback, as I've mostly worked through everything and am pretty mentally stable now. I'm relatively certain that the presence in my childhood home is evil, even demonic. I've talked to my mom, and I get the sense that she doesn't really believe me, but my wife and I are pretty certain of it. This story took place when I was a kid. My dad has been a pool man for many years. One of his oldest customers decided to purchase a ranch. I don't exactly remember where. He asked my dad if he could come and fix their pool, which was disastrously maintained before he bought it. He gave my dad permission to bring us along, and told us that we were welcome to stay a few days to enjoy the ranch. We drove there, and I had been in charge of reading the MapQuest instructions because I never seemed to be able to sleep during car trips. We drove back home a few days later, after my dad was finally able to save the pool. The drive home was very long. For endless stretches, the view was mostly desert, farms, and the occasional small suburban town. Unlike me, my mom and brothers were knocked out almost immediately. So, most of the trip, it was just my dad and I talking or listening to music. I'm also a very avid reader, so I had a book on my lap beside the maps. I remember the ride had been quiet for a while, because I had been reading. I had to stop because it was getting dark, and my dad would only let me turn on the dome lights to read the maps. No radio service, and the Game Boy batteries had all died. All I had left to do was stare out the window. All of a sudden, I spotted a very tall shadow on a roof. I realized that there was a man who seemed to be wearing a hat, bowler or top hat, dancing and jumping from rooftop to rooftop of this suburban lot. It was kind of like the scene from Singing in the Rain, which, at that point, I had not yet seen myself. It took a second for me to realize that this was not a normal thing to observe. The houses were separated in a way where a normal person couldn't possibly have jumped from roof to roof the way that thing was. What scared me the most is how at the last house before a field he seemed to turn around and sense me. He bowed and tipped his hat. Even though I couldn't see it, I could also sense that he was smiling. All I felt was dread. I turned to my dad to see if he had also seen it, but he had of course been paying attention to the road. When I looked back, I couldn't see the houses anymore. They were way behind us. I never saw a face or any details. He was just a silhouette on the roofs. I remember the feeling of being afraid that it would follow us. That it could, if it wanted to. I never saw something like that on our many road trips ever again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but it felt so real. The memory is so vivid as well, which always comes back when I'm watching old musicals because the dancing reminds me of the way that he moved. I've had a few paranormal experiences in my lifetime. My mom and dad said that when I was little, they would wake up in the middle of the night to me crawling around my nursery and saying a man with glowing eyes was playing with me. They believed it was my grandfather who died when I was born a hallway away, but I haven't seen him since. Anyway, my boyfriend used to live in an old farmhouse built back in the late 1800s with roommates. None of them believed in activity, but I asked about the old barns in the house when I was staying there. I always felt unsettled in the house when I would sleep there and often would wake up at around 3:12 a.m. to pee. But one night I woke up at that time and stumbled down the hall to the bathroom. At the end of the hall was the staircase, which was creaky and old, and I heard it shift. I stopped at the bathroom door and saw the face of an older man peer around the corner. I jumped into the bathroom and shut the door to pee, but felt goosebumps all up my arms and my back. I didn't feel afraid of him. He looked pretty nervous, but it spooked me really bad. I went back to bed and didn't see him again. The next time I stayed there, I woke up at the same time to pee, and I saw him standing against the wall. But this time, he actually reached his hand out to me and motioned to go downstairs. I cautiously went towards him to see him go downstairs, and I peered around the corner to see him facing the door with his hands behind his back and staring at the open field in front of him. This time I noticed that he was wearing glasses and was older, with a scruffy white beard and dirty pants and boots like he'd been working outside. My boyfriend came down and found me, so I went back to bed, but didn't sleep at all. The last time I saw him, I woke up at 3:12 yet again, and rubbed my eyes to feel a really warm sensation around my hand, as though someone with really strong, working hands was grabbing me with both of their hands. But I sat up to see nothing. My heart was beating loud, but I felt safe and calm, and I swear I heard the whisper, "I'll miss you," before I went to look for him. He was in the hallway again, and he tipped his cap before whistling and walking away. I followed him, but didn't see him anywhere, and this was the last night we stayed there before we moved to a different town, into our own home. As crazy as this sounds, I miss him, and he was a sweet soul. I hope the boys that live there don't bother him too much. I asked about him after we left, and visited my boyfriend's friends, and they said their grandfather had died before they were alive, and he was a working farmer whose wife died before him. He loved animals, and wore big bottle glasses. I really think it was him, and that since the boys didn't believe in ghosts, that he just wanted someone to be his friend. I was a senior in high school, and I always hung out with my sister, who was 5 years older than me, and her friends. That night it was us siblings, her best friend H, who was the same age as my sister, and our friend G, who was about 20 and enlisted in the army. We thought it would be a great idea, since it was close to Halloween, to play with a Ouija board for the first time. We got a Ouija board and decided to turn off all the lights in the house and light a few candles to really set the mood. So we sat on the floor of the living room and started our little game. I was sitting between H and G, across from my sister. It took a while, but we finally got a response when G asked if anyone was there. The planchette slid to yes. We kinda giggled because we thought it was one of us. But then it started spelling out Maman. My sister and I immediately go pale and make eye contact across the board. Our grandmother had passed away next door about a year prior to this. Before we could ask another question, the planchette spelled out the word love. We still weren't convinced. A little spooked, but not scared. G then asked the board, "How many children do you have?" And the planchette slid to the number 2, which is the correct number of kids that our grandmother had. It's important to know that G and H didn't know very much about our grandmother. They came into our lives after our grandmother had passed, so they never met her. The planchette then spelled out the words, "Roll Tide." Now we live in Alabama, and my grandmother was the biggest Alabama football fan. She would watch every game. The Alabama football catchphrase is, "Roll Tide." My sister and I immediately begin crying because it just seems so unreal, and then the planchette starts moving again. This time it's sliding around and going to the word, "Goodbye." I ask, "Do you want us to stop playing?" And the planchette quickly slides to yes. My sister doesn't want to stop. She asks, "But why? We want to ask you more questions." And the planchette quickly moves across the board to spell out the word, "bad." That was more than enough for me. I felt like if this was my mama, and she was telling us to stop playing, maybe we should take her advice and quit while we were ahead. She said bad. Did that mean that something bad would happen? Or that doing that was bad, with the Ouija board? I don't want to find out. But after trying to convince my sister and friends, it did no good. The planchette keeps circling the board and going back to goodbye over and over again. Finally, everyone says goodbye because it's clear that nothing else was going to be discussed. But then, for some reason, I was talked into participating again. This time when something answered us back, the planchette moved across the board even faster, but it was between 2 letters only. Z-O-Z-O-Z-O. And that's all it would say. I don't know what the others felt, because we really didn't talk about it much. But to me, it felt like the room became colder. It was then unanimous that we did decide to say goodbye. We were shaking. Whatever we had just spoken to didn't feel right. My sister and I decided to sleep in the same bed. I remember lying in bed and being huddled together and just looking around the room. Every sound made me jump. I swear, I could see dark humanoid figures all around. Maybe it was paranoia, but I definitely did not sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about how Mama, or whatever was imitating her, had said bad, like it was a warning. My sister ended up getting rid of the board shortly after. I'm not sure what she did with it. I know her and some other friends tried to play with it again in a very old graveyard near our house with graves that dated back to the 1800s. While they were playing, they heard what sounded like footsteps in the woods around the graveyard, and what sounded like scraping on one of the headstones. I don't plan on touching another Ouija board again. Once a year, my parents go on a vacation together somewhere in the U.S., usually to the Bahamas or to Florida. They leave me in charge of the house with my dog and like for me to check on my Nana, who lives in our basement. My dad likes to take part in this weird golfing competition with his friends, where if someone wins a certain amount of holes, they get to take home this creepy doll as sort of a trophy. I don't get why, but I guess it's just some running gag. Well, my dad won the competition, and he brought it home before he left. I'm not at all scared of dolls. In fact, before he left, I slept with it beside me as a joke. It was basically an old baby doll with a missing eye and a brown dress. I don't know the origin of it, and didn't really bother to ask. November rolls around and my parents leave for their vacation. Everything goes normal for a while, but then things start to get weird. Because I'm the stereotypical little brother, I put the doll on my sister's bed, who's in university, and took a picture to send her as a joke. She hates dolls. So I leave the room with the doll still in there and head to my room just to send the photo and move on with my life. A few minutes later, I hear a massive bang. I jump, startled, and go to look out into the hallway. My sister's bedroom door has slammed shut. Now, our hallway has no opening windows, and there wasn't any sort of draft. Even if there was, that bang sounded forceful. A little on edge, I open her door and see that the doll has fallen face forward, even though I left it sitting upright. I thought it was weird, but brought the doll back into my room and moved on. That night, I'm sleeping normally in my parents' bedroom. I have to sleep in there while my parents are away because I need to keep an eye on my dog, and she refuses to sleep anywhere else. I wake up suddenly in the night, which is odd. I usually sleep all the way through the night. I check the time and see that it's around 3 a.m. This immediately scares me because I read that it's the witching hour. I glanced over at my dog, and she was awake too with her head up. Also strange. I put on my little puppy voice and ask my dog if she needs to pee, but she just stares back at me, then looks to the closet. I look to the closet too, and see that it's open even though I remember shutting it before going to bed. I quickly turn the lamp on and get out of bed to close the door. I don't even bother looking inside. My teenage brain still thinks a ghost is more likely than an intruder. So I get back into bed, scroll on my phone a bit, until I fall back to sleep. I wake up the next morning as usual to feed my dog, but when I go out into the hall, I see my bedroom door is open. I always close my door when I'm not in there. Now, it was still dark out because I have to feed my dog around 6 a.m. or she throws a fit. I look inside my room, turn on the light, and the doll is on the floor. I left it on my bed. I remembered last night and am now feeling paranoid, but again, I just put the doll back on my bed and leave, deciding just to have my door open. After feeding my dog, I went back to bed to sleep a couple extra hours. That's when the most frightening thing happened. I was woken up by a loud banging sound. Loud enough to wake me up, the heaviest sleeper in my family. I quickly got up and ran downstairs, my first thought being maybe my Nana had fallen in the basement and was banging for me to help her, but when I got downstairs I realized that the banging was coming from my balcony door. I saw the glass shaking, as if something was hitting it from outside. The banging was so loud that it was shaking the counters. The strangest part is that my dog was just standing in front of the door staring at it, and she's the type of dog who will start barking if a mouse farts. I'm really shaken up at this point. It's completely still outside, no wind at all. I text my parents and tell them what's going on. As soon as I do, the banging stops. They tell me it's probably nothing to worry about. I went downstairs to see my Nana, but she had no idea what happened. She's also completely deaf, so of course she couldn't hear it. She can't even walk up the stairs, so there's no way she caused any of it. That was the last weird incident that happened. The next week, my parents got back. I didn't tell them everything that happened because I didn't want them to think I'm a chicken or something. Needless to say, I moved the doll out of my room until my dad brought it back to his golf team. Nothing else strange occurred. I still have no idea what went on during those couple of days. I sort of wonder about the story behind that doll now, but I don't really know if I want to ask my dad. In October of 2018, I was hospitalized for 4 nights. I was put in the surgical wing due to lack of beds, and was in a 4-person room with all rooms near me having 4 people as well. The last night of my stay was on the 31st, which of course was Halloween. Other than it being noisy from the firecrackers outside, followed by the heavy rain, it was uneventful. I was particularly restless that night and not having an easy time falling asleep. Just before midnight, and I remember looking at the clock seeing 11:47 because I couldn't fall asleep. I saw a figure in the window next to my bed. It was a massive black dog, like a long-haired husky with the reddest eyes that I have ever seen. It was such a deep, but at the same time bright crimson. It was just staring at me, and I felt completely frozen. I turned over and covered my face, and when I looked over some time later, it was gone. I should note that I was on an upper floor with a roof landing outside my window, so no way could an animal have gotten up there. I ignored it, called the nurse, and asked for something to help me sleep. They told me I didn't need anything and would eventually sleep on my own. About half an hour later, I saw the same creature staring at me from inside a window within the hospital across from mine. I immediately felt sick and panicked, and as quick as I saw it, it was gone. Several minutes later, my wing went on lockdown. The doors all closed, and all I could hear were screams and nurses running. The screams and panic went on for 4 hours. I found out the next morning that a pregnant woman in the room next to mine had died from an adverse reaction to the medication that she had been given. She went into complete psychosis, and at one point was running through the halls, banging on everyone's doors, begging for help, and telling us that the nurses were trying to kill her. I will never get those sounds out of my head. I had no idea what hellhounds were until I got home and searched. For what I had seen. I've let it lay dormant in my brain since then, but recently I've been having dreams where they show up, and it's terrifying. I'm so lost as to what to make of it, and terrified to make any assumptions. My parents have owned a tavern/restaurant for 14 years in my small town. My father is someone who likes to start new projects and is a well-known person in our town. One day he was contacted by the local realtor to offer my father a private showing of a historical hotel that had been up for sale. This hotel has been around for decades and went from hotel to restaurant to bar with little success. Everyone who had owned it before put it back on the market within a year. The bank had the title now, and the realtor told my father, if you don't plan to buy it and fix it up, they're going to rip it down. A lot of people in the town thought that the only person who could save it was my father, so he bought the hotel. My parents kept the downstairs bar and renovated the upstairs for apartments. This is when odd things started to happen. My father would come home almost every night with the camera footage to show my mom and I. The footage always showed an empty pool room with small, random orbs floating in the foreground. My father is a believer in the paranormal, but my mother is not, so her and I both chalked it up to bugs and dust. Although I will agree, the way the orbs zigzagged around the room was weird, but it still seemed like nothing. A month goes by and my father comes home early on a Sunday from working down at the hotel. He walked into the house, looking spooked, something my father rarely ever is. He detailed out how he was behind the bar, checking on receipts from the night before, when he heard footsteps approaching from the hallway entrance. We don't open on Sunday, but if someone my dad knew saw his truck in the parking lot, they would just walk in to see him. So he didn't find the footsteps odd at all. Without looking up from his receipts, he called out, "We're not open, but give me a sec." He heard the footsteps enter the bar room and take 6 more steps toward him before stopping. Taking another second to finish going over the last night's shift, he looked up and peered around the wooden support beam, and there was no one. He said he got out of there so fast, he doesn't even remember locking the door behind him. My mom obviously thinks he's crazy, but I am freaked. That place always gave me the creeps, but my father confirming my fears made me want to never step foot in that building again. 2 days ago, my mom had an experience there that sent her out the door faster than my dad. She was in the bar room before opening hours collecting the shift money from the night before. She wasn't there for more than 5 minutes before she started to hear the faint sound of music coming from the entrance hallway. She said she ignored it for a while, assuming it was one of the tenants upstairs. After collecting the money, she went to leave and the music started getting louder. She said it sounded like old waltz music, piano-based, and that it was clear as day. The further she walked down the hall toward the bedrooms, the more prominent the noise became. As she stepped in front of the women's restroom, she said it sounded like someone was in there playing the music on their phone. By this time, my mom was sufficiently freaked out and ran out of rational reasoning behind what it could be. Just as she was about to open the door, she said she heard the water turn on and off twice before she left the building. In the parking lot, she called my dad to come down, certain that someone had been in there with her. But when he came to check it out, no one was there. Now my mom is a believer, and we are both properly terrified of that creepy old hotel. I've had several unexplained encounters which I guess you could say are paranormal. I've never believed in that kind of stuff until the experience that I'm going to tell you now. There's a creek below my house where me and my friend would go to hang out when we were kids. It was away from everyone, where we could do whatever we wanted to. We'd normally build a fire and just chill and bring a radio so that we could listen to music. One day I decided that we should go fishing since we never have down there and there's a bunch of deep spots that are perfect for it. So I get my grandpa's old fishing rod. It was literally a piece of bamboo with a fishing line tied to it. I don't know why, but I just wanted to test it out. He brought his dad's old fishing pole. Both my grandpa and his dad had unfortunately passed away years ago. We pack everything up and head down. We decide first to start fishing near the entrance to the creek because there's a few deep spots there. So we bait our hooks and I throw my line in and he does second. As we're waiting for a bite, my friend tells me someone is coming. I turn around and see no one, yet he says he can hear walking. I keep looking and soon I see a man coming around the corner wearing a hat and overalls. He's very dirty as well, like he just got done working on a car or something. When he sees us, he stops and stares. My friend starts freaking out and telling me to get my knife, since I always carry one. I, however, feel like he wasn't a threat, and just watched him. My friend has always been nervous around strangers and has a fear of them. He begins walking toward us without a word, and stops only a few feet away from my friend. He doesn't seem to acknowledge me and doesn't even look at me and my friend. He stares at him without uttering a word. My friend finally speaks up and says, "Can I help you?" The man simply replies, "Have you seen my wife and kids?" He also calls my friend by name. My friend replies, "No, I haven't seen anyone else down here." The man says nothing and walks away, and as he walks around the corner, I follow him, and as I look around the corner, he vanishes. I see no trace of him, and there's no place he could have gone except straight, because there's fences on both sides. I look back at my friend and tell him he's gone. My friend tells me that's not possible unless he could run extremely fast uphill. I then asked if he knew him because he called him by name, but he swears he has no idea who the man was and has never seen him before. We both decided that was enough for one day, packed everything up, and left. We never saw him again, though we've been down there hundreds of times since that incident. Not long ago, however, I stumbled upon a gravestone hidden in thick grass at the same creek. It was a man who died in the 1970s, who was also a Vietnam veteran. So, I've always had hyper-realistic dreams. I also have always believed that my dreams are how God talks to me. I know that sounds a little crazy. Regardless, the other night I had a dream that I believe is a sign. I also should say that my walk in faith has been wavering in the past year, and I've also been going to see psychics a few times a year since last December. Anyway, to the dream. I believe I was on a road trip with a couple of my buddies. We stopped at a little diner in a small town that had a psychic, gimmicky store attached to it. I was waiting for my friends to use the bathroom, and when they both came out, they both said that they wanted to go and do a reading. I said all right, and that I would wait for them to be done. They went through this black-lit corridor through a purple-curtained doorway. They came back out not too long after, all smiling and cheerful. They told me that I should do a reading, but something didn't feel right. I've always been sensitive to energies in general, but there was something about this place. They kept tugging me when all of a sudden the psychic came out. Immediately, all the alarms were going off in my head. She came up to me and got really close to my face. She had these bulging eyes, and her face was full of super white makeup, really heavy eyeshadow and eyeliner. Her hair was a fire truck red, and slicked back into a bun with feathers and things sticking up. She was really freaking me out, but I was like, alright, whatever, so we start. She grabs me by the shoulders, and we make very intense eye contact, and she starts telling me a bunch of things like I have the gift, something that I already know. And we start backing away almost like a dance, and then we both get on all fours and drop down on our bellies, and she starts to slither toward me. Literally, slithering, without using her hands. This is when I know something is actually really up. I stop everything. I stand up, and am telling her that I'm done. She is still slithering toward me. She then slithers all the way up my body until her face meets mine. Then she says, "Let me show you the way." I say no. This makes her super angry, and she picks me up by my throat and keeps chanting, "Let me show you the way, let me show you the way." She starts running with me in her hand, and the room keeps elongating, so she keeps running. Then snakes start coming out of her sides, and they burrow into my skin. I feel the pain of them digging into me and biting me. I'm grabbing onto her wrists, and I scream, "No! There is only one way. God is the way." And I scream this while making eye contact, and she starts screaming bloody murder. And I get the strength to gouge out her eyes with my thumbs. More snakes and spiders begin pouring from her eye sockets, and I scream that again, that God is the way. And that's when I woke up. This is one of the unexplained series of events, and the existence of the unknown, in my very intimate environment. Location. My grandma's apartment is in one of the populous areas of Yangon's downtown, which is a 30-year-old apartment that has no record of criminal activity or any violent events whatsoever. The place? There's a room in this apartment that is always gloomy and subsequently felt ominous whenever a living soul would pass around it or in it. It's a typical, normal bedroom. Queen-sized bed, modern furniture, and a picture of Jesus Christ in it. Even though there's nothing abnormal about the room itself, the aura that it gave out is evil. It used to be my late grandpa's room, in which he was suffering from hepatitis C. The problem: the room itself is locked now and no one lives in it, since it used to cause the house members and guests chills whenever a person or just someone would pass around the room unexpectedly. Whenever you look inside it, there's no one. Sometimes a 3-second long snickering laugh in a low tone can be heard. This can happen at any time of the day. Sometimes there's nothing at all. But whenever a person tries to lay on the bed of that room, everyone who's done it has said that they felt someone is watching them with an evil smile. But it's just their feeling, including mine. Another common denominator is that we cannot identify how that evil looks or where it came from. We all know that something is just there. What all of the house members and guests agree on is that something is watching the bed, as previously stated, with an evil smile. The aftermath. Even though no one goes near there and the room is locked since my grandpa's death, we are all worried due to the frequent sounds and laughter that we can hear at any random time. My aunt, who lives with my grandma at the same apartment, said that clapping can also be heard at a certain time of night, but not regularly. But it can't be anything from upstairs coming down, because upstairs is an empty hall that's been cleaned and locked by the previous owners until they find another renter. These events are strange since they didn't happen right away after my grandparents moved in. It started happening like a decade after they'd been living there. The rest is history. I hope you all can tell me what it is. All the family members are questioning to this day. When I was younger, my parents had gotten divorced. My dad was an abusive alcoholic who drained my mom out of a lot of money, so my mom and I left at the time. My aunt offered to let us stay at her house until we got back on our feet. Now, my aunt lives in the countryside. It's miles of farmland and a few houses every now and then. Her neighborhood is small, but everyone keeps to themselves. The area my aunt lives in is called the Base. Apparently soldiers were housed there, and eventually died and were buried on that land. Don't know the exact history, though. Driving to her place at night is super creepy and confusing. You can easily get lost, so everyone aims to reach home before the sun sets. Now back to my story. My aunt had a second house, not too far away, where her family would go to do gardening and just chill out sometimes. My cousins and my aunt thought it would be a great idea to spend a night there. The house was an old, abandoned Baptist church converted to a house that my aunt had inherited. The previous owner was a seer woman and would do readings and even give exorcisms for people. My aunt took care of her when she was ill, therefore she gave the house to my aunt. The inside was run down, one couch for about 10 of us. Yeah, it was a big family. And a dirty bathroom with an annoying leaky pipe. Light barely entered the house during the day. It also gave an eerie vibe to it, because being in that house or on the land, it was always dead silent despite being surrounded by nature. That night, we all had these little rooms to sleep in, with there being so many of us that we had to share. My mom and I were in one room when I woke up to the sound of the wooden door being creaked open. I turned to see my mother upright, shaking and obviously full of fear. No one came through the door, but you could hear these loud, heavy footsteps around and inside the house. It woke everyone up, so we all huddled in the living room. All of a sudden, the lights cut off. We lit some lamps, and my uncle was getting ready to check on the noise outside when a loud banging came at the front door. It was around 1 a.m., and this place was completely deserted. We all stood still and quiet, and then the banging grew even more violent. The door began to shake, and a guttural, demonic voice was asking to be let in. Panic and terror struck all of us. My younger cousins began to scream and cry because the voice was unnatural, pure evil. The adults sent us into one room, and they formed a prayer circle in the middle of the living room. Everyone's backs were turned to the window, but I was the only one facing it, and I remember very clearly seeing a tall man with horns and a red aura looking back at me from outside. He was smiling at me, motioning me to come toward him. He had these long black fingernails that he began to scrape the window with. At this point, everyone could hear it, but by the time they turned to the window, he had vanished. However, all the doors started banging and the windows were rattling. We kids all ran out to the living room and joined the prayer circle, reciting the mantras from my religion, and then suddenly it stopped. The sun was now peeking in. It was 6 a.m. Everything felt like an hour, but we couldn't account for the rest of the time that had passed. We stayed for a few months in my aunt's original house without ever visiting that second house. My mom eventually got remarried, so we moved. It's been about 17 years or so since that incident, and we rarely visit my aunt, like maybe once or twice a year. Since then, however, the house has been demolished. My aunt has said that strange things occurred whenever she was on that land after that incident, and she felt like she was being watched. She couldn't handle it, and they eventually sold the land, too. I first discovered the Ouija board when I was 14. A girl was visiting from America, I'm in the UK, and she told us how to talk to ghosts. 8 of us went to her house and made a board with ripped bits of paper and a turned wine glass. 4 of us would put our fingers on the glass, and we would swap someone out every so often. This way we believed that it would eliminate anyone who might be pushing the glass. I'll add here that the finger that had been in the glass always felt cold afterward. Don't know if others have noticed this. The first few days were spent asking silly questions like, does so-and-so fancy me, or who will I marry, etc. On the 3rd day, things took a darker turn, and we started getting responses told to us without asking. It started saying things like, so-and-so will get run over, and X will die of cancer, and other really freaky shit. This scared us, and we stopped playing. Years later, in my early 20s, I shared a flat with my brother and boyfriend at the time, and bored one night we decided to do a Ouija board. So we made a board, as I had when I was younger, and set to it. It didn't take long for the glass to move, and we asked who it was, where they came from, and how they had died. It told us its name was Bill. He was an old hippie, and he had died from an overdose. Anyhow, things went on for a while, then my boyfriend, who was convinced that we were the ones pushing the glass, said if there's really a ghost here, prove it. I kid you not a second later, the lights went out. At that time, I had one of those old-fashioned meters that you had to put money in, so after my initial shock, I reasoned that I needed to put a coin in the meter, and stood up to do it. But before I got to the door, the lights came back on. Somewhat spooked, I sat back down and me and my brother put our fingers back on the glass. My boyfriend point-blank refused. The glass then spelled out, "Chilly trick, hey." After that, it kept going in circles and moving toward me, so I decided that enough was enough and said goodbye. A few years ago, after Facebook started and I got back in touch with my old school friends, I heard that one of them had died of cancer in his late teens. Not sure about the other prophecy, but I know that I'll never do a Ouija board again, and I firmly believe that we do tap into forces beyond our 5 senses. I have these dreams sometimes. Sometimes they're warnings, and other times they're just odd. I started noticing that they weren't normal when I was about 8, and I started having the same dream every night. My parents were freshly divorced, and my mom had moved into this yellow house. The heater didn't work, and every window was broken. She wouldn't allow us near the windows because she was afraid we'd get cut. This house was mostly normal during the day. The buzz of the fan above the stove while Mom cooks, me and my sister playing, the TV on, just seemed normal. But every night, that dream would come back. It wasn't a bad dream, just one that I really don't get. A native man, who looked like he was probably a chief based on the headdress, would walk into the house through the front door. He would look at me for a long time before opening every cabinet and drawer, and then would exit through the back door. I had this dream for a week or two before telling my mom. But I went to her one day and I said, every night I have a dream that someone opens all the drawers, cabinets, and doors, and it's really starting to creep me out. She looked at me and told me that she had woke up and had to shut every door and cabinet and drawer that morning. Then, when I was about 10, my uncle was hospitalized. All of our family was staying together in one house so that we could all help each other out. Our uncle was a big part of our lives and really kept the family together. The adults went to visit him, and all us kids stayed home with one adult who stayed behind. When they came back, they told us very little about my uncle's condition. They just said he can't wait to be back home. That night, I dreamt that I went alone to find out what had really happened. I walked into the hospital room where my uncle was, and I said, "Hey, Uncle, it's me, your niece. How are you?" And he said, "Who are you? I don't have any family. I don't remember them." I spent the rest of the dream trying to convince him that I was real. It smelled like hand sanitizer and old people. I woke up crying and screaming. I don't know why, but I knew it wasn't just a dream. So I asked my mom and aunt, "Why did you lie to me? Uncle doesn't even remember us." They asked me how I knew. I dreamt another time that my mom was wearing all red. She was so confident and pretty, and I remember telling her in the dream that she looked really nice. And then her boyfriend came out. He started fighting with her, asking why she was wearing that slutty color. "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right? Now you know what? I don't want to be with a woman that dresses like that. Have fun being single." I woke back up, and she was wearing all red. I begged her to change. I said, "Mom, something bad is going to happen," because I remembered how much she loved him, even if I hated him. She didn't listen, and a few minutes later I was hearing, "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right?" All over again. Things like this stopped for a while. Everything was peaceful, and I didn't read into dreams too much. Until last year, anyway. Last year I had a strange dream that my current boyfriend was in. At the time of this dream, we were only acquaintances. We had just barely met. The dream was unlike any of the others, because I wasn't all the way asleep while I was having it, and I found that I could not move. Other things happened too, but I'll get into that later. The dream starts with me walking to the bathroom because I had to pee. Then I make the decision to leave the bathroom door open because no one is home. I have the quick thought to myself, "Don't leave that door open," but I ignore it. It's gotten to the point where it's time for me to clean up and wash my hands. But when I look out the door as I'm about to get up, I see my current boyfriend. His head is tilted to the side, and he's saying, "She's here." He says it very creepily and matter-of-fact-like, but it doesn't sound like him at all. He continues and repeats himself. I say, "Who? Who is here?" But when I engage in the conversation he's trying to have, what he says changes. He starts saying, "Her heart is here." At that point, across the hall from the bathroom, my bedroom door swings open to show me a little girl. But she's not a little girl at all. She took my voice. I tried calling out for everyone. My dad, my sister, the neighbors. Nothing would come out until I called for my mother. But calling for my mother was useless. She lived an hour and a half away. I woke up calling for her. I figured it was a sign to visit, but we weren't on the best terms. Anyway, around the time Halloween was supposed to be celebrated, my cats started acting really weird in my room. I started feeling uncomfortable staying in there. I couldn't breathe in there after that dream. My cats would scratch at the walls, and sometimes would hiss at my closet for no reason. On Halloween night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dreams I was gonna have, so I took NyQuil and passed out in a record 17 minutes. I figured I'd be asleep all through the night, but I woke up at 3 a.m. I saw someone standing next to my closet. It looked like my mom, but I wasn't sure. I shut my eyes and refused to open them because I was terrified. When I woke up, without telling my mom anything about what had happened, I asked her what she had dreamt of. And she told me, "I dreamt I was standing next to your closet. Something's not right about that closet. Maybe you should come visit for a while and give yourself some space from there." I want to make it very clear, I never told her anything about this closet. I didn't tell her that I saw her when she dreamt she was there. I didn't tell her about the girl. I didn't tell her about the cats. So I came to visit after about a month, around Thanksgiving. I had been sleeping in Dad's living room or going to friends to avoid my bedroom. I couldn't wait to sleep in a bed. Everything at Mom's was wonderful. We had movie night, talked about things, and just got caught up. So when I came back to Dad's, I actually hadn't slept. I was so happy to be at Mom's, I had just stayed up the whole time. So when I got back, I was pretty exhausted. I went to my room because I was feeling better about it. I turned on my nightlight, still terrified of the dark, and opened my bedroom door. I will die in a fire before I shut that door when I'm inside the room, and lay down to go to sleep. Instantly, the dream took me, before I was even all the way gone. I felt someone hug me and start to kiss my neck. It felt like someone I knew, and I wasn't bothered by it. But the second I relaxed into the hug, it got tighter and tighter until I couldn't breathe. I realized my nightlight wasn't on anymore, and the faint glow from the hallway wasn't much. But it was enough for me to see the closet door open and these odd creatures come out. Short, undefined. Any lines that defined them were just white lines on their shadowy bodies. I felt that they were going to hurt me, and again I was terrified, but I just woke up, and then it was over. I looked over though, and I realized that my closet door was still open, and my nightlight was off, even though I had shut that door and turned the light on beforehand. Back in the winter of 2019, my partner and I had settled into a hotel for a few days before going on vacation elsewhere. I am somewhat sensitive. I've never seen a full-body apparition in reality, and never had any physical paranormal happenings up until this point, either. I've only ever felt feelings in environments. This hotel room was no different. Upon entering the room, I felt a sense of calm when stepping inside. However, there was also a sense of curiosity. I felt as if something was watching my partner and I. Over time, this feeling became more comfortable, to put it lightly. Over the course of the next few days, different feelings became more noticeable by the minute. Most of the feelings consisted of being watched. Eventually, I asked my partner on our second day there, "Hey, do you feel anything off about this room?" To this they responded, "No." Whatever was watching us noticed that I noticed them. That's when the experience turned from lingering to dark. Later that night in bed, I had a normal dream. I don't remember most of it, other than maybe one image of running curiously through a black hall of mirrors. Suddenly, as if I had blinked, I saw the hotel bed, my partner and I, sleeping. We were laying away from each other, but there was a mass between us. A dark mass. It leaned in closer to me, and I felt what can only be described as a light body pressure on my back and arm as it held around my torso. The thing spoke to me in my sleep, more specifically in my mind. It had a male voice, but took on the voice of a mixture of my partner and my first ex-partner. It casually threatened that it was going to hurt my partner. I couldn't move, and my perspective was going back and forth from my own perspective of laying on one side of the bed to seeing a bird's eye view of the bed. I wasn't lucid enough to tell it to go away, but did have enough control to ask why, and to say, "Don't hurt us." It then responded, "I don't want to hurt you, but I want to hurt your partner, and I'm going to." I kept telling it not to better not to leave us alone. Then it threatened to hurt me as well. I could feel its intent, so I stopped responding. To my silence it replied, "Good. Be glad that I'm not hurting you, but your partner is going to hurt. Right about now." As soon as it said now, I jolted awake to the sound of my partner's blood-curdling scream. My partner's leg had developed a Charlie horse cramp in their sleep at the same time that the spirit had spoken its statement. I could still feel the spirit's energy upon wakening, and one thought popped into my head. I told you. The next morning, we packed our bags for the vacation. I could feel whatever had tormented my partner the other night, watching us leave. I told my partner about the incident, and they jokingly told me not to sick any demons on them. But they did believe me. I've never had a spirit contact me so directly in my life before this. That spirit did not attach to me, surprisingly. It stayed in the hotel room, and it's unlikely that I'll ever go back there again. This story takes place in 2017. My then best friend, I'll call her Lex, and I were having a sleepover at my dad's house. I was 16 at the time, her being 17. We often had sleepovers on Fridays where we would eat junk food, watch as much Netflix as possible, and have deep conversations. This night was no different, and so unremarkable that I've forgotten everything that we did. That is, of course, until we were trying to fall asleep in my bed. I remember being completely exhausted, slowly but surely drifting off despite sharing a bed with someone. I was just on the brink of sleep when Lex got my attention. First, she simply asked if I was awake. I grunted in response, signaling for her to continue. It should be said that I was quite literally a minute or two away from unconsciousness, so I didn't pick up on her tone of voice or think much about what she said next. "I'm gonna go use the bathroom downstairs," she told me, getting off the bed. This wasn't normal, her announcing that she would be slipping away to use the restroom, but I was too out of it to be annoyed or curious. Not long after she left, probably no more than 10 seconds, it started happening. Again, I was on the precipice of sleep, so my mind wasn't racing with thoughts or in any state to freak myself out. Nevertheless, I became filled with the feeling of impending danger out of absolutely nowhere. I was becoming very lucid very quickly as dread and anxiety overwhelmed me. I had never felt this kind of acute fear before, nor seemingly out of nowhere. Now wide awake, I opened my eyes and stared at the wall. Less than a foot away from my face, as I slept facing away from the bedroom door. My heart raced as I tried to understand the situation, but I didn't move. Something told me that moving would be a very bad idea. My room was pitch black as well, so that didn't help matters. All I could think about was how scared I was, and how I hoped that Lex would return soon. I can guess that a few minutes passed like this, when suddenly the bed dipped on the side that I wasn't occupying, as if someone were sitting down. Problem was, not only did Lex struggle to get onto my bed due to its height, but my bedroom door had never opened. At this point, I was petrified, and I only became more afraid as I felt something against the back of my body. It felt like a person, just gently pressed against me. I thought to myself hysterically that there was no way this was actually happening. I held my breath to better isolate the feeling, horrified to feel the presence moving as if it were breathing, too. In and out, pressed against me. In and out. The atmosphere is still suffocating in the room, filled with what I can only describe as evilness. The aura of whatever was touching me screamed danger. Don't move. I will hurt you. My mind and heart are racing as I try to think of a way out of this. The only balm I have to lessen my anxiety is the fact that I know Lex will eventually return. But what happens then? She wouldn't see whatever it was pressed against me when she entered the bedroom, too occupied with making sure she wasn't disturbing my sleep. So I told myself that once I heard the door open, I would address her and ask her to turn on the lights. After what I would come to find out was about half an hour, Lex finally did return. The second I heard the door open and light flooded into the bedroom, I called her name. She hesitated, her soft voice saying, "Yeah?" I requested bluntly, "Turn on the lights." She did as I asked, and I shot like a bullet from my previous position, whipping around to inspect the area where I had felt the presence. There was nothing. I wouldn't notice right away, but later I realized that the horrifying aura that was plaguing my bedroom had vanished once Lex arrived. It was gone just as suddenly as it had appeared. Still, I was in a state of horror for the next few hours. We watched some cartoons together and decided to sleep with the lights on, but not before talking about what had just happened. Lex revealed to me that the reason she had gone downstairs wasn't to use the restroom, but to call her boyfriend for emotional support. She told me that she had felt panicked, wanting to leave the room to escape from the stifling feeling. Lex couldn't get a hold of him, and spent the next 30 minutes or so trying to calm herself down. In the morning, Lex and I would confide in my dad, the only other person in the house. He was rightly disturbed and told us that he had a nightmare that night. I can't remember what his nightmare consisted of, only that it was a really bad one. My dad is a veteran, so he is not easily spooked, but it left him uneasy. The fact that my dad had a nightmare at all made this whole experience more notable to me. To wrap things up, I want to say that I had improperly used a spirit board a few years before this with a few of my friends at my dad's house. We were children, so we didn't take it any more seriously than any other Halloween game. Nothing of this magnitude had ever occurred before, though. Just this one night. Lex and I were able to acquire holy water from one of the teachers at our high school after she told him the story. We used it to cleanse my bedroom. Nothing strange has happened to me, or my dad, since. I had to have a Ouija board for Christmas. My wife refused to buy one, so I did it anyway. One night, when my wife was out, my daughter and I tried to use the board. Nothing. The planchette didn't move at all, or if it did, I could feel my daughter pushing it. As I suspected, it's just a parlor game. Move ahead 2 weeks. While working in the garage on a guitar amplifier that I was building, I had a very strong feeling that I was being watched. As I had spent many hours previously on this project without any sensations, this was disturbing. It got so bad that I couldn't spend more than a minute or so in the garage after the initial encounter without the hairs on my neck going up. Then came the whispers. More like a shh, shh sound, actually. Kind of a be quiet between two or more people lurking about. This only happened when entering the garage from the house, and later when my daughter called me at work to say she heard shh, shh when entering the darkened dining room. Since she was alone at the time, I blamed it on the cats. I too experienced it in the house, but usually only when entering the garage itself. Finally, I decided that enough is enough. I went into the garage one night and yelled at whoever was there that they had to leave because they were scaring the crap out of us. No more whispers after that. I wasn't yet into paranormal investigations at the time, so I didn't have a digital audio recorder to leave in the garage overnight. It bothers me now that I had real live spirits in the house to test with, and I didn't have the equipment or the moxie to do anything. As an 8-year-old child, I was given a porcelain doll by a very dear family friend, Miss Marion. She was all the time coming across things and giving them to me. This doll was the last thing she gave me. I was never really into dolls at all growing up, but I took the doll and placed her in my room in a small, child-sized rocking chair. The chair sat right next to my closet and dresser beside my nightlight. The doll was very pretty. She was dressed in a peach and cream colored dress with an apron and petticoats. She had little black Mary Jane shoes that, when removed, showed her delicately painted toenails. Her body was soft, only her head, forearms, and legs from the knee down were porcelain. Her lips were pink, and her dark brown hair hung in slightly frizzed and now loose curls. Her eyes were brown, her cheeks a rosy peach color, all like mine. Miss Marion had a point of saying that the doll reminded her of me, which is why she gave her to me. From the moment that doll came into my house, things began to happen. I was always uneasy with Claire. I never wanted to touch her, and when I played in my room, it felt as if she were watching me. It wasn't anything to panic about, but I do remember feeling like if I did something wrong, she might actually tell on me. How ridiculous does that sound? The first real occurrence I remember was when I was reading in my room. Ghost stories, if you can believe that. When a musical carousel horse that sat on my dresser began to play. Not just a couple of notes, like old mechanical music boxes will do at times, but like someone just wound it up fully. I sat stunned and stared at the little horse as it moved up and down in time with the music, and then it just stopped. Not wound down, just suddenly stopped. I was a pretty brave kid. I didn't run, and I didn't tell my mom. I just let it go. The next thing that happened was the voice. For several nights, and on into these years, I was woken up by what sounded like a woman inches from my face shouting my name. I would jump and sit up and find my room empty. Those happenings died down after a few months. She then started to plague my little brother with the same thing, and now that he and I are grown and gone, she's moved on to my dad. The little things started to get to me. I'd put something in a certain place only to find it later on the floor or on my dresser, right next to Claire. All my missing items eventually turned up around her. Once a ring ended up in the pocket of her apron. Books would fall off of my shelves, and a perfume smell would sometimes fill my room. The doll itself didn't smell at all, but the air around her would. My catalyst to finally get Claire out of my room was the night I woke up after hearing thumping around near my closet. I opened my eyes, sat up in bed, and of course my eyes were drawn to the nightlight where Claire sat. As I watched, the source of the thumping became clear. The rocking chair Claire occupied was rocking on its own. I had thick shag carpet, so there's no way it was rocking just by chance. If that wasn't enough, Claire's feet, which were both turned to the side facing opposite each other, slowly straightened themselves to be both pointing directly up. This part still freaks me out 20 years later. She then turned her head, which was quite impossible to do since it was attached, fixed to her cloth body. She looked toward me, and every music box in my room, 4 of them, started to play at once. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't feel endangered so much as I just felt scared of what was happening. I screamed for my mom and dad. The music stopped, but Claire maintained her gaze in my direction. And this is why I hate dolls. Even after that, I couldn't get rid of Claire totally. I ended up stuffing her in a box in the back of a storage closet. She's still there as far as I know. So is the woman who now screams my dad's name in the middle of the night, and not in the kinky way. While I think she explains some of the oddities that happened in my parents' house, I don't think she's the tie to it all. My grandparents died about 10 years ago. They both died peacefully of old age and left an old house in a countryside. That house has a lot of great memories. My best Christmas and birthdays. Despite that, recently I've started having nightmares that would always have the house in them. Sometimes someone's chasing me, other times there are ghosts. It's always basically a horror movie scenario. Being religious, I thought it was about time to visit my grandparents' graves and light a candle. It's about a 3-hour drive, so I decided to visit them and crash at their house for the night. Well, I'm never doing that again. It was still bright outside when I arrived. I went inside to open the windows and clean up a bit. That's when I heard a weird sound. It was as if someone was walking in the room, but no one was there except me. I was spooked, but I convinced myself that there must be rats or other creatures in the attic. I managed to stay calm and rational, and spent the rest of the evening watching YouTube in bed. That's when the fun started. The internet connection is terrible there. You kinda have to walk around the room to catch 4G like some sort of Wi-Fi. Like many times before, my internet lagged, and I ended up sitting in silence. This is when I heard it, loud and clear. There was someone in the kitchen, and they turned on the light switch. I was sure it was that switch, because whenever you turn on the light in the kitchen, it made this loud click sound. I literally froze. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I was about to be killed by some maniac. All the knives were in the kitchen too, and I only had pepper spray in my bag. Then the intruder started walking, slow steps as if they were just wandering around. I thought I will die from fear, and I didn't know for how long that I was frozen, but it really did feel like forever. I was literally waiting to be killed. I don't know how much more time passed, but it was long enough that my muscles started spasming from being so intense and not moving. I gathered all courage, hoping that the intruder had left, and somehow managed to go to the kitchen. The light was on as expected, but the person had already left. I ran to the door, expecting to see it wide open, but to my surprise, it was shut down and locked, as I had left it. There was no sign of entry. I'm never going back alone. About 5 years ago, I had just moved into a new house with my wife at the time. We had 2 kids, ages 2.5 and 1. My 2.5-year-old was very articulate for his age, and so one day as we were walking out the front door, he points across the house and asks, "Mommy, who's that little girl right there?" Well, my wife and I just kind of froze, because he was the kind of kid that had never made up any imaginary friends. or anything like that. But the moment passed, and we kind of forgot about it. Around 6 to 8 months later, I remember I was in my bedroom late at night. I have a large window in my bedroom that looks out into my backyard. I also had a couple strings of lights overhead that illuminated the yard perfectly. One night I was up studying for a class the next day when I looked outside and saw that my kid's swing set had one swing going back and forth in a perfect pendulum motion like someone was on it, while the swing next to it was dead still. This was not the first time this has happened. It was actually the third, I think. But it was the instance that I remember the most clearly and took the most notice. I honestly have no idea why I didn't think to tell my wife or to take a video, but I just stood there in the window and watched it for a couple minutes, and it kept up perfect consistency. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out to my deck to get a better look. Still swinging. I had been studying lots of science classes at that point, so my head was in the space of, I'm going to figure out the rational explanation of why this is happening. It was breezy out, so I walked up to the swing set and held my hand in different places around the swinging swing, and no breeze. Plus, again, the swing next to it was dead still. Also, my thought was that if it was the wind, there was no way that it could keep a perfect back and forth motion. If a swing gets even a little off, it would have collided with the one next to it. Anyway, I'm not sure if I had a previous encounter with my son in mind or not, but I had a very certain feeling at that moment that there was a little girl swinging on the swing. Almost like I could see her, but obviously couldn't. I also felt very at ease and not frightened at all. Then after about 5 to 10 minutes, I stopped the swing just to see what would happen, and it remained stopped. I remembered apologizing out loud to the girl for stopping the swing, and told her that she could swing whenever she wanted to, but it never happened again after that, and I haven't had any additional encounters at this house since. I looked up public records and asked the landlord if there was ever any little girl that had died in this house, and nothing. The only info that I could collect is that a few years before we moved in, there was an elderly woman who lived here for about 20 years, but the owner had the landlord kick her out in fear that she would die on the property, so she had to move in with family a few states away. Anyways, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. When I was 13, I fell in love with a guy who said that he was 17. His family was from Haiti. I was a tomboy back then, so I was just excited to have somebody, anybody, like me. We started a romance. I was with him until about 16. He always snuck me around, and I obviously hid him as well. My mom would kill me if she knew that I had a boyfriend at that age. I would cut school and sneak into his house to, well, you know. His grandma, who he lived with, always creeped me out. She was indigenous and wore long, African-looking dresses and hated me. She saw me a few times and would outwardly show, disgust. I never understood why. Fast forward. I was 16. My boyfriend was acting weird. I got suspicious when I received some prank phone calls. I asked to see his phone logs. Long story short, I called some weird numbers and found out that he was having relations with 12 to 13-year-olds. Still, even though he was with me. I was so angry at this point. He was 20-ish. So I went to the police. I don't know why. I just did. They looked him up and down and told me that he wasn't 20. He was actually 27 and had had former charges for statutory rape. They asked me to tell them where he worked. Turns out, he was a pedophile the entire time. No wonder his grandma was disgusted at me. I looked like a child, and she knew his age. He was arrested, and I was asked to testify. This is where the scary stuff happens, by the way, if you've made it this far. 1 week before testifying, I was sleeping in my bed. I had a full-sized bed against the wall. This is important because on the other side of that wall was my mom's room. As a child, I would knock on the wall when I got scared, and she would come and rescue me. That night, I was on my back when I woke up with sleep paralysis. I couldn't move. I knew because I frantically tried to reach for the wall and couldn't. My limbs felt abnormally heavy and wouldn't budge. I felt serious pressure on my chest, although there was nothing on it. And then I saw it. On my left, standing or kneeling next to me, was what I would call or only describe as a demon. He didn't give me a violent vibe. What was terrifying is it was ominous. Smug even. He looked male, dark skin, almost like a seaweed green. Texture was bumpy, rigid. I just remember extremely sharp features. Pointy nose, pointy head, pointy chin. Very triangular looking. One thing I absolutely cannot forget is the smile. He has an ear-to-ear grin, a confident and perverted smile. I was terrified, unable to scream. And then I felt it. He shoved his disgusting fingers down my throat. This is where it gets almost perverted. It was a vigorous motion. He enjoyed it. It hurt. I closed my eyes and didn't know what else to do but pray. I'm not even religious, and I just prayed and begged for help. I felt the pressure lift off of my body, and my mouth was suddenly clear. I was too scared to move or open my eyes, so I pretended to continue to sleep and ignored the taste of iron in my mouth. I woke up the next morning absolutely mortified. I couldn't speak. My throat felt as if I had swallowed glass. There was blood on my pillow and in my mouth. I ran to my mom. I tried to voice what had happened. She was scared for me, but told me that it was all a dream. I didn't testify. I was scared to speak, and my throat hurt. I was just so stressed with everything, I wanted nothing to do with anybody. He went to jail anyways, because at that point, it was the state against him, not me. Time passed. I grew terrified to sleep alone. I always felt like the demon was in my room. I never saw him again, but I felt his presence everywhere I went. I would sleep facing the door and pray before bed, always. I would hear it in my dreams, sometimes telling me, "I'm still here," mocking me as I would run down the stairs in my dream and my legs would grow heavy. I would try to get out of my house, and I had to fight my body to move in my dream. There was even a time when I was at an ex-boyfriend's house years later, and I was brushing my teeth, and all of a sudden out of nowhere felt the hairs on my body rise, and I had this insane panic knowing that the demon was there. He was literally hovering on me. I couldn't see him or smell him or anything, but I felt his presence. I ran to my ex's bed and asked him to sleep on top of me the entire night to protect me. I had never in my life broken down like that. I can't explain it. I just knew that the demon was there trying to break in again. So I was about 22 when I got a phone call from the pedophile ex. He found me and called to check on me. Despite him being sick, he did love me in his own way, I think. I don't know. I don't feel like digging into it. Point is, he found me and called. He thanked me for not testifying. He said it saved him more time in jail. I had to ask. I asked him if he knew anything about demons. I then told him what had happened and asked if he could do anything with it because I remember him telling me things about his grandma doing hoodoo. He was silent. Then he finally told me without many details that he didn't exactly know what his grandmother had done, but all he knew was that a few weeks before the trial, she had come to where he was living with another African-looking guy in very indigenous clothing and asked for a few of my things. He gave them my hairbrush with my hair on it and other trinkets that I had left behind. He told me they took it and left. He doesn't know anything else. I was livid. I never spoke to him again and changed my number. I'm 30 now. I'm still scared to sleep alone. I don't feel the demon anymore, however, but I still have PTSD. I am still scared to have the door closed in my room. I still think about it every night before bed. I pray before bed. Although I never saw him again, I still feel something heavy. Not as bad as that time with my ex years ago in the bathroom, but it's more of a subtle heaviness. 3 years ago at my last apartment, which I believe was haunted, I was always so terrified. I would have scary dreams, the type that happen in your bedroom so you're not really sure if it's a dream or if it's real because everything looks the same. I remember having the urge to run out of my apartment sometimes. Just run. I would be on the couch and I would feel that fight or flight feeling and just jet toward the door and stand in the hallway outside my apartment because I was terrified for no reason. Demons exist. I won't get into other small stories that I have now because they're really not major compared to this one. But I will also say, I think I have experienced angels as well. Small stuff like having lost things appear on my bed when I live alone, or being in a dangerous environment and having a sudden feeling of, I need to stop doing this now, after seeing 2 pillars of parallel fog. If there's anything to feel good about, it's believing at least in the theory of opposites. If there's evil, which we know that there is, then there has to be good as well. My family and I lived at a large property called Gladstone Villa in the former mining town of Bargoed, in the Caerphilly County Borough of the South Wales Valleys in the UK. From 1969 to 1978, we experienced activity that simply defied rational explanation, such as lights going off and on. We witnessed electrical cables being pulled, and my grandfather Bill claimed to have had a glass bottle thrown towards him as he entered the main bedroom, missing him by inches. I didn't personally see this myself, but I still recall the time he came from there with the broken bottle in his hands, and he told us what happened. There was the occasional sighting, but this was very rare indeed, so rare that in all the 9 years I was there, I never once saw it. But I did hear it many times in the bedroom. It's still worth mentioning that my mother, Caroline, saw it on at least 2 occasions. There were also regular footsteps heard in the main bedroom every evening. Sometimes during the day we'd all be downstairs watching TV. One of us would turn the volume down to hear it more clearly, and my grandfather Bill would point to the ceiling and say, "He's by there," or "He's by there now," trying to make out where the footsteps were coming from exactly. There were 5 members of the family that were living at the Gladstone Villa. My maternal grandfather was William Higgs, known as Bill to family and friends, a retired miner who worked at the local colliery. He was a short, bald man who liked nothing more than to listen to his country and western LPs, Johnny Cash, Glen Campbell, and so on. He also liked westerns on TV that starred John Wayne or Clint Eastwood. My maternal grandmother was Rita Higgs. She was a short woman who was a housewife. She was completely teetotal, but liked to smoke. She also liked collecting garden gnomes and liked watching soap operas on TV. My mother, Caroline Dexter, met my father at the local bakehouse on Baldwin Street. She was day shift regularly, and my father worked the night shift. He would stay behind to make her a cup of tea and chat. They dated for 3 years before they got married on Monday, the 1st of April, 1968. The Beatles were number 1 with Lady Madonna. They did not get a place of their own, but they decided to live with my grandparents at Gladstone Villa, which was in Cardiff Road. I was born on August 24th, 1969, when everyone was listening to the latest number one in the charts, Honky Tonk Woman by the Rolling Stones. It was soon after that my mother said that strange things started to happen. I was just a baby when she said it all started off rather quietly, like small tapping here and there, but nothing too noticeable. But in time, the activity gradually increased. One time my mother said the family heard a noise like someone jumping down from the attic and onto the landing. Naturally thinking that someone was trying to break in, they went to see what was going on. When they got there, they found no one, but the latch to the attic was open. Whatever it was eventually occupied itself in the main bedroom, which incidentally was my grandparents' room. It soon made its presence felt by walking around the bedroom, and the sounds of dragging could be heard. One day, my mother went upstairs to that bedroom to get my father up for work so he could be ready for his night shift. When she got there, she was confronted by the sight of the ironing board placed on my father's torso as he slept. When he awoke, he was astonished to find the situation he was in. He suspected my grandfather Bill was playing pranks, but in time he knew my grandfather was not responsible for it, and he told his work friends what was going on, and it got around town that Gladstone Villa was haunted. My parents separated in 1972 and my father left Gladstone Villa, but it wasn't because of what was going on at the villa. It was just a breakdown of the marriage. They finally divorced on the 25th of April, 1975. The British band, the Bay City Rollers, were number one in the charts with Bye Bye Bay. Again, very apt. It would have been amusing but for the fact of what was going on there. I was barely 2 years old, so I have no memory of my father living at the villa. But he would come to see me every Saturday to take me to see my paternal grandparents and to the local cinema. Great times, even though the paranormal activity still continued. As I got older, too, I witnessed the activity for myself. I actually saw the poltergeist activity. I watched electrical cables being pulled by unseen forces. I saw the lights going on and off, and when my grandfather Bill would play records on Sunday as the family did dinner, it would turn the music off. It took exception to the British band Slade and any religious TV shows my grandmother Rita would watch. The local police were also involved. I remember them popping their heads into the attic, hesitating and not going in, but they suggested it was my father playing a prank on the family. A family friend, Mrs. Ivy France, she was more of a friend to my grandmother Rita, she was very skeptical when my grandmother told her that Gladstone Villa was haunted. I can remember Ivy going into the main bedroom, looking around and saying it was vibration from the traffic outside causing it, but she was soon to change her mind when she experienced it for herself. It was then she suggested that the local press be contacted, and a medium. The medium was John Matthews, and when he came to Gladstone Villa, he started by asking the family questions. He then began by challenging the spirit to perform by knocking on the ceiling, and sure enough, it responded by knocking back at him. At some point, John went into a trance to try to make contact with it, but he failed to get a name. He later confirmed the obvious, that there was indeed a presence there, and that it was an earthbound spirit, and that it had unfinished business. A priest by the name of Graham Jones was then called to Gladstone Villa. He blessed the property, and after a few prayers, he duly left, and it was quiet for a few short months after that. No incidents. But it did return, and with a vengeance, and this time it decided to show itself. One evening, my grandfather Bill, my mother Caroline, and I were watching television. My grandmother Rita was reading a book, when all of a sudden my mother just so happened to look to her left, and she saw a full, solid figure of a monk standing by the doorway. We did not see this, as we were otherwise occupied, but she later described it in detail as a monk in typical brown habit, complete with hood over the head so she didn't see the face. It sounded very much like a 16th century Benedictine monk. Fred Davies was a friend of my grandfather Bill. They worked together at the local colliery, and he would visit most evenings. Fred was a slim man who would wear a flat cap and glasses and smoked homemade cigarettes that hung from his lips as he spoke. He would sit in his favorite chair by the open fire and talk to the family and watch TV with us. One day, Fred was with us, in his casual place by the open fire. I was quietly playing with my toys by the sideboard. It was tranquil, when all of a sudden there was one very loud bang. It was so loud that Fred ducked his head and I ran to my mother for comfort. When it was gone, we all went upstairs. My grandfather, Bill, would always be the first and I would be the last. When we went to that bedroom, we found nothing that could account for that noise. Fred later told us that he ducked his head as he thought it was going to come through the ceiling. Fred told us of another experience he had at Gladstone Villa. My grandfather Bill liked to look out the landing window that overlooked Cardiff Road and into the Bargoed town centre. This time Fred joined him, and he said that he felt something brush past him, but when he looked, there was nothing there. The most frightening experience I had was when I was alone in that particular bedroom. I made sure the light was on. It was very quiet as usual. I was lying on the bed facing the window that overlooked Cardiff Road when I suddenly felt something heavy pounce on the bottom of the bed. I heard the bed springs go just once, and I felt the bed bounce. I didn't look straight away, but when I did, there was nothing there. I went downstairs to tell my family, and we all went back up. We saw distinctive paw marks on the bed, like that of an animal. I later found out that my grandfather had a black Labrador dog called Toby, who died before I was born. My grandfather Bill and my mother Caroline claimed to have heard a baby crying there, but as I didn't hear it at the time, I took very little notice of what they said. The activity got so bad that my mother, grandmother, and I slept downstairs with the lights on. It was only my grandfather Bill who was supposedly brave enough to sleep in the bedroom itself. It was then that he himself had yet another experience. He told us that he was lying on the bed when all of a sudden he couldn't move. He couldn't even shout for us to help him. This could well have been sleep paralysis, but he said that he heard something in the room with him. My grandmother Rita had her own experiences. One day she went upstairs into that room to get my grandfather up when she saw the boiler door open wide by itself. She didn't stay there to see what it was, but she rushed out. Another occasion, she said that she had the sense of something pulling from under her foot, as if she had stepped on someone's gown. We had the ghost for so long that my grandmother Rita gave it a pet name. She called him Johnny, and my grandfather Bill would shout out that name to provoke a reaction, but nothing would happen. Ivy Francis's son, Charles, got to hear about what was going on at the Gladstone Villa, and he came along with some friends, and with my family's permission, they went into the bedroom. It frightened one of his friends, and to this day, his friend still says that it is a spooky place. My mother Caroline had an operation on her and ended up on crutches. The local nurse would tend to her foot. One day she was sitting on a chair when the nurse came, and the nurse knelt down to tend to her, and she told my mother not to hold her. My mother looked at my grandmother Rita in amazement, as she was not holding the nurse at all. My mother made her own conclusions that it was Johnny the ghost that was holding her, so as not for the nurse to hurt her. The only time I heard the ghost being vocal was the time that we were all in the room. One of us wanted to use the bathroom and we couldn't get in there. My grandfather Bill said, "He's behind there." I heard quite distinctively the sound of a Gregorian chant, and that was it. Nothing more. We left in the summer of 1978. when two local businessmen bought the property in Gladstone Villa, was eventually converted into a small hotel and its name changed to Reds Park Hotel. On the night before we moved, there was one final incident that we experienced, as if it knew that we were going and that was its way of saying goodbye. My mother, grandmother, and I got ready to go to sleep. The light was still on, and then we heard the doorknob turning as if someone were trying to get in. At first, I naturally suspected my grandfather Bill, as he was the only one who slept upstairs in that room, and we thought it may have been him playing a prank. I called out to him, but there was no answer, no laugh that would give him away. We then heard our belongings that were packed in the hallway being thrown around. The next day, we asked my grandfather Bill if it was him playing a joke on us. He insisted that it wasn't him, and to this very day, I believe him. I had my 40th birthday at Reds Park Hotel in August of 2009 for old time's sake, and it was the female staff that told me about the ghost, and I told them what had happened to me there 30 years before. The staff told me of their own personal experiences, lights going off and on, the odd sighting in a room, a bridge, a bride in white was seen. Again, as with the claims of the baby crying that made no sense to me at the time. I did a thorough research of the property in the Cardiff Road area, and I found out some very interesting things indeed. I found out from the Bargood Library and the local newspaper archives that Gladstone Villa dates back to 1900, and it was named after the former British Prime Minister William Gladstone. I discovered the previous people that lived there. The Kimyett family in 1924, the new married couple Michael and Evelyn Kimyett, and a son named Elvin. He died at the property at just 4 months old, according to the archives of the Cardiff newspaper The Western Mail of that year. This explained the baby my mother and grandfather had heard in that bedroom so long ago. Mrs. Evelyn Kimyett died in 1970, soon after I was born. Maybe this is why all the activity started. I also found that there was a monastery in Baldwin Street, where my parents met and worked, and there's a property directly opposite the former Gladstone Villa property in Cardiff Road dating back to the 16th century. It is now a public house called the Rafa Club. A priest hide is said to be there, but it's sealed up. This explains the monk that my mother saw. What I have said here is true. I wouldn't share this if I couldn't possibly back this up, and I have used real names, as I have nothing to hide, and all I have said can be verified by the family of those people that I mentioned. Sadly, some of the people I've mentioned are no longer with us. I challenge any hardened skeptic and firm non-believer, and I can assure them that they will indeed most certainly question their belief system. Of this, I have no doubt at all whatsoever. In fact, I am 100% positive. I don't think this was paranormal, but it felt so real that it undid many of the knots in my heart. My father passed away 21 years ago, when I was 20 years old, leaving behind his mother, my grandmother, wife, my mom, and a daughter, me. 2 years before his death, my father had urged my grandmother to sell her small home and shift with us so that we could look after her in her old age. He built a decent house, considering he came from a very poor background, that we had to sell off after he passed away. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. I often used to think about how our life would have been had he been still alive. He was an honest man, but in a powerful position. When he passed away, I was still in college and unmarried, with no exposure to the outside world. Had he been alive for a few more years, I could have used his guidance to fulfill my career plans. He was the only earning member of the family, After he passed away, nothing remained the same. We all struggled financially, emotionally, and ultimately physically. Then I got married to a verbally, financially abusive man. But I saw this dream only yesterday, never before it. I had not been thinking about him or of any of my difficulties before I went to bed. In the dream, I was in my grandmother's house, which again we had sold 23 years ago. She had passed away, but my father was alive. He was sadly looking at the empty house from his childhood. I asked him what he planned to do with the house. He said he would probably sell it, but he sounded very sad as he said it. Then I suggested if we should keep the house and just rent it out. This way, we could return to it whenever we want and have a financial backup too. My father said that in the face of financial difficulty, we have a bigger home to fall back on. But he seemed relieved that he didn't have to sell his childhood home. When I woke up, I realized that it had all felt so real, as if I had lived an alternate life. It was what life could have been. I cried, but I also felt that I had been lucky to be able to live in that life. Does anyone believe in alternate lives here? Do you think my soul had made a trip to an alternative life somehow? Most of this stuff happened to me between the ages of 10 and 18. I've posted before about my haunted school, and I'd like to share more of what I've heard. Whatever these things are, they have really enjoyed screwing with me periodically. I was 17 and had just gotten home from some event, either with a church group or some friends, I don't recall. It was about 11 p.m., and as mandated, I woke my parents up to let them know that I was home and alive. Don't remember why I felt the need to shower that night, but I did. The shower was a stall with a glass door and really high-pressure steam, which was almost deafening in that plastic stall. You would have to shout at me right next to the bathroom door in order for me to hear you, so that's why what happened next was so shocking. Mid-shower, there was this loud, blood-curdling female scream that I could hear from inside the shower. I had never heard someone scream like that in real life, and it paralyzed me for a second. I have 2 sisters, and so I immediately thought the worst. I busted out of the shower, ran to my parents' room dripping wet, wearing only a towel, fully expecting my parents to be getting up to see who was screaming. The house wasn't that big, just a double-wide trailer with an addition. I was shocked to find them in bed asleep still. Their door was open. If I heard the scream, then they should have really heard it, especially since neither of them are heavy sleepers. I woke them quickly and asked if they had heard that scream, which they didn't. Mom was concerned, and Dad hopped out of bed and we checked on my siblings. All sound asleep. So then we searched the house and even looked outside. Nothing. He usually gets annoyed and upset when I talk about the paranormal. He had to exorcise some evil spirit from a room when he was on his mission at age 20, so he prefers to have them just not exist at our house at all, and no scary movies. But this time he was pretty calm, probably because he could tell how upset that I was. I wasn't dreaming, hallucinating, or making it up, and he knew it. I was standing naked with a towel, nearly hyperventilating and still dripping from the shower. Dad tried to comfort me, telling me it was probably just a cat outside. Yeah, really. He didn't believe it, but that's what he was selling, so I better buy it. I really had nothing else to do but go to bed. Down in the basement where most of the activity occurred, but you bet your butt I didn't sleep much. Whatever it was that was screaming would bug me periodically. I was the only one in the basement, so naturally, I was the only witness. I have lots of stories that my family still won't believe. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Ettal, Germany, in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double bed on the second floor. My sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I had walked into a wall of, I'm not sure what to call it, bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as an overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues, other than just waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air were crushing her. That unnerved me even more, just knowing that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out. Plus, she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented into my head that that wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully when at about 2 a.m., I'm woken by something ripping the covers off of me and being jerked about 2 feet toward the end of my bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into my room, because when I turned toward what had grabbed me, a huge, looming black shape was visible in the darkness, as if a man were in there with me. I frantically flipped the light on, only to have there been nothing there. The window was locked from the inside. There was no one in the closet or the bathroom, and my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night, terrified. The next morning, we were at breakfast, and my sister mentioned that she was also up half the night, because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room, but when she turned on the light, there was no one there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience. We checked out that day, so I didn't get to experience anything else, but it still freaks me out. This happened to me 2 years in a row when I was young, too young to face as much horror as I did. I was 6, and it was Halloween. I was just getting into bed when I heard an awful screeching sound coming from the hall closet. It was right by my mom and dad's bedroom, but they didn't hear a thing, which really freaked me out. I slowly got up out of bed and ran silently to the closet. I opened the door, and it took all my effort not to scream. I saw a yellow metal box. I opened it and saw the creepiest doll. It was a raggedy, ugly, old doll. Its hair was in 2 long, blonde braids. Her, I should say. I slowly picked the doll up. It screamed again, and this time I did too. From that night on, the thought of it lurked in my mind until the next Halloween, when I had another encounter with it. When everything happened again that year, I made up my mind and threw it away. The next day, I had gone into the closet to get my hula hoop, and my eye caught the yellow box. I picked it up. I opened it, and an uncomfortable chill ran down my back. The doll had returned. I couldn't get rid of her. Ever. To this day, I still know its exact location. I worked at Hotel del Coronado, opened in 1888, on overnight shifts very often. We have historic pictures all over the walls of Babe Ruth, Roosevelt, Marilyn Monroe, etc. My overnight manager kept a tiny red notebook next to him every shift. Every strange occurrence that would take place would be noted. We have obnoxious ghost tours with crappy Unreal stories going on all the time. But in reality, they could have just asked the night crew for some tales. We would have some items turn on and off, which was normal with old wiring. We would receive creepy phone calls. People would see figures that would disappear and hear things when no one was there. Bellmen would find children's handprints littered all over windows and mirrors when they have not seen a child all day. But one story stuck out from the others. The overnight manager was doing his laps around the halls as he does every night. Some were curved sharp, where you couldn't see what was on the other side. It was around 3 a.m., of course, when a hooded, dark figure darted far ahead across his path. He shouted and scurried quickly. He turned the tight corner to find an empty hallway and a room door. No sign. It was just open. My manager sat, puzzled, thinking of how he had never entered that room and was curious of the layout of it. In hospitality, you must be able to describe every inch of the rooms. He wandered back to his office and scrolled through the room numbers, finally stumbling onto the one from earlier. Then he sat in shock when he discovered the room's snapshots. The first picture in the layout file was of himself on his first day of work. In 1996-97, I lived in a fairly old terraced house with a cemetery at the end of a road. Cliché, I know, but it's an important detail. Nothing remarkable about the house or the area, it was just convenient for college. Anyway, I was up late one night on the PC in my bedroom, which looked out onto the street. It was about 2 or 3 a.m. For whatever reason, probably to give my eyes a rest, I wandered over to the window and looked down at the road in the direction of the cemetery, although it was too far down the street for me to actually see. And I saw 3 people walking slowly down the road. I could see that they were quite old and appeared to be dressed in funeral clothes, which, given the hour, was weird. There were 2 women and a man. I'd put their ages at about 80, and the woman in the middle was being steadied or guided by the other woman and the man as they came closer. I got the impression that she was upset. My first thought was that given their age, she had recently buried her husband and grief had caused her to behave slightly irrationally. It was all interesting enough for me to carry on watching as they got closer to the house. Just outside the front door of the house was a street lamp. I continued to watch them as they made their way past, but when they got to the lamppost, they all stopped, and the upset woman in the middle looked up at me and grinned. This is where it got even weirder. The grin became a sort of grimace, and if there was any color in her face to start with, it was now dead white. At that point, I realized that I was staring right into her eyes, but her eyes were pitch black. If you've ever crashed a car, the final split second before you make impact seems to drag out as you process more information than normal in the time frame. It was that sort of scenario. I'm sure that we only made eye contact for a second, but it felt like several minutes as my peripheral vision faded and I felt like all I could see were those 2 black holes in her face drawing me in. The distance between us didn't change, but somehow it felt like she was coming closer. At that point, the 2 people with her were just continuing to look down the road as if they were frozen, but waiting for this woman to finish with whatever she was doing. I was suddenly hit with this intense feeling of dread and panic, so I threw myself to the floor. As soon as I had broken away from her gaze, I felt pretty stupid that this upset old woman, who clearly needed help, had spooked me so badly. I looked out the window again, and there was no sign of them. Lately I've been dreaming about pretty weird stuff. I can't remember everything, of course, but I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my ability. About 1 week ago, I started dreaming more often and I could remember them clearly when I woke up. But after about 2 days, some inconsistencies popped up. At the end of the dream, I would start hearing weird noises. This, of course, didn't bother me until 2 days ago when I woke up very early, about 6 in the morning, and the sound was still there. I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights and noticed that my window cover, a sliding cover since my roof is slanted, was pretty much wide open. My window is right under a streetlight, so I always close it because I need complete darkness to sleep. When I jumped up and turned on the lights in my room, the sound immediately stopped. It's hard to explain the noise, but it sounded like the flapping of a piece of clothing against the window. I'm pretty sure that it shouldn't have happened because that's my only window, and there is never any draft in my room. I decided to just go downstairs and forget about it since I was probably still just half asleep. This is where it got weird. I have a little decorative Captain America shield on the desk in my room, which is next to the door. This is important. I started dreaming normally, superpowers and stuff, until I somehow made it back to my home in my dream. And in my dream, I sat down behind my desk with the door open. When I look out of the door from my desk, I see the closet doors from across the hall. In my dream, I remember that I started to fall asleep behind my desk, and I could see out of the corner of my eye that the closet door started to open. When I looked up and blinked, it was all normal again. This happened once more, but the third time I looked up, and the closet door kept opening. So I got scared and threw the Captain America shield at the closet door. In my dream, not in real life as far as I know. And then I jumped out of my bed, scared. When I turned the lights on at, again, 6 in the morning, the shield was gone, and lying on the floor next to me. I was very sure that that shield had been on my desk when I went to sleep. Ever since I was a kid, I had paranormal experiences. One intense rule of the house my mom gave me was never to participate in a Ouija board. When I was 14 years old, I'm now 20, I let my curiosity get the best of me and decided to do a Ouija board with a friend. In my room in the complete dark, we began the process. To my surprise, nothing happened. Later that night, I let my mind and fear get the best of me and decided to sleep with my mom, who had no clue that I had previously participated in a Ouija board, otherwise she would have killed me. As I was falling asleep, my mom asleep right next to me, I saw the silhouette of a large man in the doorway. At first, I told myself that it was just my brother. I called his name twice, then noticed that this figure was at least 6 inches taller than my brother and completely unresponsive to what I was saying. I started to panic and pray as I realized that this was not my brother and perhaps something far more evil that I had invited into the house. I was too afraid to move or to wake my mom. After about 5 minutes, though it felt like 10 years, the figure disappeared. I struggled to sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I was getting ready with my mom in the bathroom. Keep in mind that she has no idea what I had seen in her room last night, or even that I had done the Ouija board. She brings up to me a nightmare that she had had the previous night. After I asked her to tell me, the answer brought me to tears. She said that there was a demonic entity in the hallway, and as she went to touch it, it threw her across the room. As I broke down in tears and told her the truth, we proceeded to bless our house. I will never do a Ouija board again. It is not uncommon for me to have dreams about shadow people or to have sleep paralysis. On this particular night, I had a dream about a red marble, and that an entity was tied to this said marble. I felt that I had to protect this marble and keep it away from people who were trying to get it. The marble bounced out of my hand, and I told the entity to roll it back to me, which it did. Here is the weird part. I remember in my dream picking up the marble, but all of a sudden I was staring up at the ceiling. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a shadow person approaching, and it started to lean over me, looking down. At this point, I have no idea if I'm awake or if I'm dreaming, but I remember saying over and over again, "Leave, leave, leave, leave." But the voice started to sound deeper and not like mine at all. My boyfriend sleeping next to me shook me awake, and I sat up, calmed down, and went back to sleep. In the morning, I asked what had happened, and he said that I was talking in my sleep and that I had said a sentence that was all jumbled, so he couldn't make out what I was actually saying. This made me feel weird, because if I did sleep talk, I would have thought it would have been one word, over and over. I remember in my dream feeling uneasy and scared. Does this sound like I was visited? Or was it just a really bad case of sleep paralysis? Edit. I also forgot to mention that I told my mom about the dream, and what time that it had happened, and she said that she had had a terrible dream and woke up screaming around that same time. We sleep on different floors, so I didn't hear her do this, but she doesn't remember her dream. A few years ago, me and a buddy from the army decided to meet and catch up. We decided on the date and place. After several hours at the local pub, it was 3 a.m., we had 3 beers each and decided to go pay our respects to a friend of ours who had died a few years ago and was with us in the army. We bought a bottle of our friend's favorite booze and drove toward the graveyard. When we got there and started to walk toward the gate, we both saw someone standing there. As we got closer, I could definitely recognize the very friend that we were going to visit. He was standing there in his uniform holding a rifle and was waving at us to come closer. I was incredibly freaked out by what I was seeing. I just turned to my friend and looked at him and asked him if he was seeing the same thing. He was so shocked that he couldn't even talk and was just nodding his head with his mouth open. We backed away slowly and went back to the car and drove away as fast as we could from there. Where I'm from, they say never go close if you see the dead calling you over. But ever since that day, I keep hearing someone call my name behind me when I'm all alone. At first I thought it was my wife messing with me, but that's not possible, because it's a male voice. Once again, I'm really freaking out. A few times I left my phone recording on all night to prove to my wife that I'm not going insane. But every time I do it, there's zero evidence. Just static and me and my wife snoring in the background. If you live in North Carolina, then you've heard of Gravity Hill. You can look it up to get information about it. One night it was me, my boyfriend, and 3 of his cousins, and we thought it would be fun to drive out to Gravity Hill and test it for ourselves. Something did, in fact, push us up the hill. Cody's car was in neutral, but something did push us up. And as we got to the top, Cody asks us if we want to go to the house. I asked what it was, and all 4 of them said, in sync, that I had to see it for myself. We drove up there, and as we got to it, it's this very old, abandoned white house. I'd say it was probably built in the late 40s, early 50s, but no one's lived in it for years. I asked him to pull into the driveway, and he did. We sat there for a minute. I wanted to see if anything would happen because I didn't believe them. We were in the driveway for 3 minutes at most when Cody said, "I'm about ready to leave. What about y'all?" As soon as he said that, his headlights dimmed so much we thought they went out. I saw someone in the upstairs window only for a second, but someone or something was standing there watching us. It frightened me so much that it brought tears to my eyes and I was shaking. We sped off and didn't look back. I still remember the feeling of all my energy leaving my body, and I never want to experience something like that ever again. So last year I received a doll from my aunt. It was a hand-me-down that she found in storage, so I don't know its origin story. Her name is Alice. First weird note is that I immediately knew her name as soon as I held her for the first time. Anyways, originally Alice sat in my room, but one day while cleaning I put her in my closet. After putting her in my closet, weird stuff started happening. I would hear her in there, usually her knocking against the walls. It was so loud that my friend could usually hear it over the phone. I would get reoccurring dreams of someone named the Medicine Girl. I would often awake from these dreams in sleep paralysis. Other objects and items would go missing randomly, only to be found in places where I had not left them. My grandmother's stuffed bear, that's at least 50 years old, would move across the room and end up in places that I also hadn't left it in. I practiced witchcraft, and the plants on my altar died. All of this stopped when I moved her out of the closet and back into my room. Due to all of this, I believe that she is haunted. However, I can't find anything online about what you're supposed to do with a haunted doll, and I'd like some advice. I believe she's scared of being alone, or doesn't like being hidden, hence everything stopped when I removed her from the closet. I am currently sitting in my bed at 12:35 in my time zone right now and was watching a YouTube video a couple minutes ago. Without warning, I suddenly hear a scream. My first thought was that it was part of my video, but I checked and it was not. It sounded like it was from a man experiencing pure terror and agony. It was a single scream from the worst fear and pain imaginable that lasted 2 to 3 seconds, and then silence. My dog started barking once I heard it. It was hard to explain, but it didn't sound like anything a human was capable of making. More like a much more convincing sound from a horror movie. I have heard some weird sounds around the house, mainly in the kitchen and dining room, since I moved in. I'm pretty skeptical about things like this usually, but that was like nothing I have ever heard before.